resort. And just double checking, we may have Walter Scoten. We just checked participants for 7-1. Did you see
Anybody know?
Christine? I didn't see him earlier.
Are.
Okay, so it appears not. Okay, so
I can watch for them.
one in-person delegation, but we're gonna move then to item 7.1. This is a development variance permit, Scoten, 3034 Miller Road, electoral area F. Staff has a recommendation on variance of the minimum setbacks to approve. So having no delegation, I guess first, are there any questions for staff on this item? Director Popoff.
Yes, through the chair, to staff, you have talked to Director Newell on this. He's not going to be here, so somebody will have to move it on his behalf.
Thank you for your question. Staff has spoken to Director Newell, but I wouldn't be able to comment as per his recommendation or thoughts.
Okay, thank you. I had brought up during agenda prep what might be a picky point, but maybe that's my nature sometimes. When you go in towards our land use bylaws, like zoning bylaws, we will state front, side, back setbacks. And then we go on to state that there is allowances to go beyond that setback, whether it's a gutter or a roof overhang or bay window, etc. So in instances like this, when we state the setback is 0, even though the drawing indicates that 2.5 foot overhang in the front will not encroach on the highways line, and then Moti comment says do not encroach on the right of way, the implication of the 0 setback is a little bit contradictory to what most contractors should do. If you say it's 2.5 meters on the side, I've always laid out 2.5 meters and the roof overhang goes back 2 feet towards. So I'd asked if it could be looked at more carefully. In my mind, we should never be saying a 0 setback if there's a possibility there's a misunderstanding. It's one thing to upset the neighbor because you get a little too close to theirs. It's another thing to not respect highways request to not encroach on the road. Not saying it has to change because the plan is part of the variance permit, but I wish our language was a little more consistent with what's in the zoning bylaw. So having had my rant of the day, does anybody want to move staff recommendation, or are there any other questions for staff?
Oh,
Director Cunningham, move the recommendation. Second, Popoff. Yes, discussion.
To the board anyway, so if Director Newell did have an objection, he could let us know.
That's right. If Director Newell joined us tomorrow, if he had any other points to raise, he could. Director Weatherhead.
Yes, thank you. I just, so this was already approved before and then it timed out. Is that what the?
Through the chair,
Sorry, through the chair.
Go ahead.
thank you for that question. So just to clarify, there was a previous development variance permit application, different owner, different set of plans. That was approved, and then there is a 2-year timeframe attached to this type of permit. And if substantial construction does not start in that time, then the permit lapses. Now, because this is a new property owner and a new set of plans, a new development variance permit application was required. And so that's why the property owner is making this request.
Further?
Just supplemental that it just sounds like that if there was 2 of these, and it sounds like the property is a bit restrictive to build any elsewhere, or is that the problem?
Through the chair, there are definitely topographical constraints to the property. And I think in order to maintain more trees on site, pushing the development towards the front of the site would be most appropriate given the context of the topography.
Yeah, and the only flat land is going to be the septic. Director Vandenberg, I see your hand.
Yeah, thank you, the chair. Just a question on when the recommendation is to allow the 0 meter setback. In terms of your point of view, are you satisfied that overall there's going to maintain the safety integrity of that decision in lieu of the viewpoint of Lloyd?
Through the chair, in my planning opinion, I'm satisfied that the safety and integrity would be maintained. I can't speak on behalf of the Ministry of Transportation and Infrastructure's requirements, but this particular property has a unique set of road requirements where we have Miller Road up top, and then it has an access that comes down below. And the sighting, when you're standing on Miller Road, is set back to the property line, so it's not common that you would see that, but that was taken at the time of subdivision. So it's not as close to Miller Road as you would think with the meter setback.
All right, thank you.
It would be an interesting but exhaustive exercise to go through what Modi has approved in terms of subdivision, road widths, goat trails across our entire region, because it's amazing how some subdivisions were allowed to create roads that are barely maintainable. And some of them are specified as unmaintained because of that. Few in my area. Any further discussion on the recommendation? Seeing none, it's moved and seconded. Any opposed? Seeing none, that goes to board tomorrow. And as pointed out, thanks, Director Newell may have other input. 7.2, bylaw amendment, Rumbling Creek Resort Limited. We do have the proponent, Jason Newton here, who I believe you said you don't have a presentation, but please join us at the table so your voice will be picked up by the mic. And you're available to answer questions. And so this is a little unique, I guess. We're proposing to create a new commercial zone or tourist commercial zone to accommodate the density of the site. So I guess we'll open it to the committee to ask questions. Since there's no presentation, if you want clarification back and forth a bit with staff, we'll do both. So questions from committee for Mr. Newman. Director Cunningham.
Thank you, yes. As you know, we met with the APC and they were able to give an approval and I've given approval, and I understand that we can do this without having to go to a public hearing, which is normally the last step. Because don't ask me why, staff let me know that. And but what's there, are you in agreement?
In the proposed bylaw? Yes, yes.
So Chair Watson, and as I said, we will go back and forth a little bit with staff. We discuss this again, like if you're changing density or changing certain things, when you have a public hearing, when can you waive? But Chair Watson.
Thank you. Well, through to staff, that's exactly my question, is that I do understand when you have an OCP that already identifies areas and a change in the zoning is not a big change to the OCP, you can waive that public hearing, but creating a whole new zone to me is a big change that would need to be reflected in your OCP. So how does this qualify for waiving the public hearing?
Either Corey or Nelson. Corey's hand is up, Nelson.
Yeah,
Please go ahead, Corey.
Thank you, Chair. Quick mic test. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, you're perfect.
Perfect. Thank you. Through the chair to Director Watson, because this proposed zoning amendment is consistent with the OCP land use policies, because it is designated for tourist commercial use, and this would still fit within that tourist commercial realm, it does meet that criteria for the public hearing being able to be waived. Whether or not it gets waived, of course, is optional. It's at the discretion of the board.
Supplemental?
Yes, thank you. It does help identify that, and I missed that because I never consider OCP regulatory, but it does still designate. So it's a policy designation that is already in existence that says it's tourist commercial. So thank you. That makes sense to me. It is identified in the OCP, and I'm sorry if I missed that in the report.
Nelson, did you want to add to that or?
No, that's sufficient. Just to note that the staff report notes it in section 4, where it talks about that alignment between and that consistency with the FCP.
My apologies, didn't read it well enough.
Director Cunningham.
Yes, thank you. And we did have a public hearing for the property right adjacent to it 6 months ago. Nobody came. So, and since the APHC has agreed in both cases, and we looked at it, we talked to the proponents in both cases and understood the nature of the development, I think that we could go to public, I have no problem with that, but I've got the feeling we'd be sitting here just myself and staff as usual.
And, sure, Director Vandenberg?
Yeah, question to the applicant or proponent. In the report that we have in front of us, there is a note back from Kanaha that an arch assessment, that is an archaeological overview assessment, would be required and a consultant fee. So you're aware of that and just making sure that.
Yeah, through the chair, we actually have already commissioned an archaeological study just based on the bad comments we received. So we've completed that study. It didn't come up with any chance finds or anything like that. So we have a chance to find protocol in place during construction if they do come across something, but the report is there and can be shared with staff as well.
No, just want to make sure that it was a part of the conversation you've been having.
Yes, definitely.
Hey, any further questions for the applicant? So not seeing any, thanks very much for being here. If you wouldn't mind stepping back to the gallery and we will move on to the recommendation or any other questions from the committee. Go ahead, Director Cunningham.
I'll move the recommendation.
As in the agenda,
Yeah, that's
second,
the agenda.
Tierney. Discussion on the recommendation to, and that is to amend bylaw, give first, second readings, and to waive the public hearing. Discussion? Seeing none, I should check chat.
Sorry, I thought I was
Again, nothing in chat, so we're seeing no further discussion. Anyone opposed? See nobody on the screen, nobody in the room, so that's carried. Now we'll go to board meeting tomorrow. This is just our committee recommendation. Thanks again. You can listen to the rest of our exciting conversation or not, at your choice.
Chair, just point of a question. After this, of course, staff, when do we do the final? After,
Oh, the trigger normally for third reading is following a public hearing. So when would this come back? Guess question to Nelson or anybody. Is there another step, a ministry step being, we're waiving the public hearing? Is that Corey? Corey, if you want, go ahead. The next step.
Through the chair, yeah, I guess the next step before going to public hearing would be to make sure that we have all of the necessary information or that we've like fine tuned or refined any of the minor subtleties of the zone.
Well,
Nelson,
You're providing, oh, sorry, Corey, you're providing notice to waive the public hearing. I know
Correct.
we've had notice of intention to consider a temporary use permit and the like. I think that's the director's question. Sort of what does that next step look, the notice to waive a public hearing? Is that similar to temporary use permit notice?
right, yes. It is similar to that same required notice in the Local Government Act for public hearings as well as the temporary use permit, just that newspaper element of having it published in 2 publications, I believe. Nelson, correct me if I'm wrong.
So
CEO.
through the chair, if it's consistent with other public notification requirements, we have to do 2 publications in back-to-back publication, so back-to-back sessions, so 2 weeks or 4 weeks, whatever that works out to be. And then once that's done, that would meet the requirements of the public notice. So if it's consistent with financial public notices and things along those lines, that's the criteria, is 2 publications in back-to-back publications.
And then following notice could come back for third reading and potentially adoption. Director Cunningham?
yes, that's exactly what I wanted to know. Thank you, Chair. After that, after the public, and then it'll come back for a third reading and adoption. Perfect. And the timeline for that will probably be.
Through the chair, it's I would say maximum 2 months, simply because of the timelines around the publications we've got in the CUNYs. Sometimes they don't line up with next month's rack.
Thank you.
Good point to bring up, and very handy having the applicant in the room to hear that. Okay. Thanks very much. We'll go on to 8.1 then, the Wild Safe funding proposal. We have a report from Todd. We're looking for further clarification or supplemental information, which we have. Todd, since you're here, do you want to give us the Coles Note version of your additional report, please?
Certainly. So as we know, in January, I presented a funding request from WildSafe, and the trigger for them asking for more money was the loss of their annual funding from Columbia Basin Trust, which is being phased out over the next 3 years. So they had a specific ask, which I laid out in those tables. And there was much discussion on that and continues to be. What I did was in this report, this is really just answering the questions that were directed at me in that presentation in January. And so WildSafe has provided all those budgetary questions, where their other sources of funding are come from, and specified a number of questions around municipal contributions. So I think that's pretty self-explanatory, and I think probably the best use of our time is if we get into the conversation. I'm hoping Manager Wolf is online because the budgetary questions will be his field to respond to.
I don't see Uli. Christine, could you email Uli and ask him if you wanted? We do have a speakers list already. So we'll launch into that, get Uli if we can. So we have Vandenberg and then Watson.
I didn't hear him talking
And
in the
Graham.
office.
Could you grab it? Because he wants to be here for this.
Oh, okay.
But like general program questions, I can certainly field. But my role with this particular program has been very administrative. It's not as demanding on my time as other programs that I manage. So I don't get into the weeds so much with these guys. But yeah, for the budgetary questions,
Okay.
if it's other program questions, I'm happy to discuss.
Well, let's try it. We have Vandenberg, Watson, Graham. So Director Vandenberg, program question. If it's a budget question, we'll all just take a deep breath. But go ahead.
Budget question.
Budget question. Can we go to Watson?
But if I may,
Go ahead.
first of all, I want to say, Todd, excellent report. Lots of good detail. Tells a really good story. Thank you for this.
Very welcome.
Did you have Chair Watson, did you have a question more around the program or the budget?
Well, I'll provide some context around the program that
Sure.
Todd helped me through the other day, and then I'll get to the budget when Uli comes in
Okay.
after Vandenberg. So I had received an email from the Village of Caslo just 2 days ago asking, would I like to contribute 2,000 to 3,000 to this, and then we'll have the program for Caslo and RAD. And so I flipped it to Todd saying, so how does this work? Because the village is asking me to partner with them. And WildSafe had contacted them saying, hey, we'll run a program for Caslo and RAD for 4,000, 5,000. Well, that's way more efficient than going through. And I was trying to understand, so what was determined, and this is where Todd can correct me if I'm wrong, is, Lily, I'm just providing the context for our email conversation yesterday. Is that the RDCK funding would be the foundational funding. So without that funding, my understanding is that the Village of Caslo would actually be seeking more funding. Because what the RDCK provides is that kind of baseline funding, which is replacing what CBT was doing. And so with that, because I was confused over, so how does that work? Because Caslo could just run it for 4,000, including Area D, and I would give them 2,000 out of my grants and then nothing out of taxation. But what was determined from what Uli and Todd provided was that our funding is not just it's covering a much more broader foundation than just the programming for those individual areas. And so without that funding, it would likely be a higher community cost, is my understanding from what we discussed over emailing yesterday. Did I get that correct?
So if I may, through the chair.
Go ahead, and then we will go back to Director Vandenberg, also had budget questions, but we're trying to split the program and budget. Go ahead.
So there's two things as I understand it. One is how the program operates, and there's no sharp distinction. Here's the municipal line and the program ends and whatever. It's always bleeding into each other, and obviously the more funding they have, the more they can do. That you get to a threshold where they can hire staff or temporary or part-time staff for certain programs or not, and they have to cover a certain region. So the municipal contributions that they do allows them to have a focus in a municipal area and areas around, probably to some degree, but without the rural component, they obviously can't expand it significantly into the rural areas, but have to focus on the municipal and immediate surrounding areas only. In regards to funding, we have to decide. Right now, it is funded as a contribution from rural admin to a 100 to the allocation service, in which we pay a portion of Todd's wage and my associated time with the program, including the contribution to the Well Safe BC. So if, as I heard from a couple directors, including you, if you have some intentions to do funding through a grant, that makes only sense if you entirely end the current practice of funding it from rural, or as was suggested from general admin, because it's general taxation. And we would not parcel out certain electoral areas not contributing. So that's a decision that needs to be made. If you continue funding from a rural or general administrative service as a transfer over to A100, or if you, as all directors, go the grant way and fund these services through your individual grants available to you, community development or whatever that would be. So that's a decision you may have to make, and the continuation of the program, which they have to decide.
Okay, thanks. We're gonna do a quick sound issue here. Thanks, Director Pendergraft, for pointing out we have someone's joined the meeting. Corinth, you need to mute, please. Every time you cough or clear your throat, you cut in and our sound cuts out. So everybody online who's not speaking or wishing to speak, please stay muted. That's just the way the system works. So, thanks, Uli. What I think I will do is maybe go back to the speakers list, because that was very general. So we're gonna go Vandenberg, Graham, Popoff, Cunningham, sorry, I did see it, and yes, and Hudson again. Director Vandenberg, the floor is yours.
Great, thank you, and through the chair. So when I look at the program, it's $1 million budget that the work that they're putting together. Of that budget, 110,000 of it is the e-learning revenue, and of that, 2,300 is identified expenses. So there's quite a gap there, revenue versus expenses of delivering that e-learning program. So I'm wondering, is it our role to, because a funding partner steps out, that we take that on? And it's an increase of 33%, 25%, and 30% over the next 3 years. But we're not talking big dollars here. And I think that the delivery of the program could still remain as it is if we were to continue just with our current baseline funding. And to Uli's point, we as individual directors then could value any further investment into the program from our own area. So I'm just of the opinion that I think we should just stay with what we have and understand that we have the latitude to enhance the program more. When you look at their overall budget, this is a small component of it. The e-learning is important, but there's an awful lot of revenue versus their expenses. I just wanted to make that comment.
Okay, and then I'm not sure if we're gonna be able to respond, because those are other potential options for this recommendation for proposed multi-year funding. So if it's okay, maybe I'll continue through the list and get everybody's input. So I was gonna move you down to the bottom. So I was gonna go Graham, Popoff, Cunningham, Weatherhead, Watson. Director Graham, please go ahead.
Thank you, and through the chair, I also had emails with Todd on this subject. And one of the things that I was trying to ascertain through this report was like what the cost would be to Area E. And I was not able to actually ascertain what that would be. Although this is a small amount, I'm still representing taxpayers, and I think they want to know, want me to know numbers for them. And the other thing I was also asking was also about grant funding, this additional amount as well. So I'm glad to see that this is part of the conversation today.
Thank you. And what we may be leaning towards is always the option of saying, well, we would recommend 2020 to 3-year agreement and see what the ramifications of that become as we get into 2025, 2026. So thanks, Director Graham. Director Popoff.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Very similar question to what Chair Watson was asking is, and I look at participants in that thing, and there's no mention of New Denver. And in the past, New Denver asked Area H to provide a grant of $1,000 because they're running that program, and I did. But last year, I couldn't get a specific answer from WildSafe BC because to me, it seemed like funding had doubled. You know, Area H is included in the rural admin funding that we're doing. And then an additional $1,000. But some areas did provide additional amounts, like Area K did last year. So in Area H, I've also got another Valhalla Wilderness that does very smart. And as at the last meeting that we had or whatever, I'm the only participant in that one for the Spokane Valley. So then I'm funding it 3 times of sorts, but with a different organization. So I want a clear understanding, you know, what value would I be getting, you know, by doing the additional funding? First, $1,000 community development fund that New Denver is asking me to participate in. And secondly is funding Valhalla Wilderness Society with basically $3,000 for the next 3 years.
Can we frame the first part of the question, whether Todd or Huli knows, do we see what New Denver, Castle, Silverton, Creston, all of them, do you see what they're funding directly, or is that something you find out about later?
Well, in this report, they did do a breakdown of those contributions. So we've got the 2023 WildSafe BC within the RDCK region. So we've got Village of New Denver is 1,000, but that's coming from your discretionary grant check funneled through them. I didn't know that. But we do have that breakdown of the municipal contributions.
That's retroactive.
Yeah.
So you don't see what New Denver might have directly contributed, and you don't see what the ask might be for 2024 onwards from municipalities?
No.
That's a lack of information that would help making a better decision.
Yeah, and I spoke with Kayla Weens yesterday. As I said earlier, this program has so many moving parts, and it's not super demanding of me, so it just keeps moving forward. But one of the things that I discussed with Kayla is that we do need to have a check-in, a preseason check-in, and a postseason check-in too. So, you know, I see moving forward having more attention to those details that the directors like, and possibly we can make that a part of the template for the reports that we submit at the end of the season. But no, typically I don't have that information.
And I'm a little concerned, I'm speaking too much, but because there's 3 more speakers. But Director Popoff, was that part of what you're looking for?
It sort of gives me an answer. I think Manager Wolf might.
In regards to the funding picture that or appear to be unqualified. So the current funding is $50,000 from rural admin. It's your service S101. You have in your funding or your financial plan document that you get annually the funding formula for that service. So for 2023, that was $1.56 million. So $15,000 would be 1% out of that. The funding is based on assessment. So an area E would be seeing a different contribution than an area D, for example. It's based on the assessed value, or area H for that matter. But you can roughly guess using that information how much your area is contributing out of that. So it's 1% of your service S101 and your assessment-based contribution to that service.
You're good, okay, we will continue on then with speakers list, Cunningham, Weatherhead, Watson.
Thank you, Chair. I noticed that Salmo was not listed, I believe that Salmo did not pay last year. That's my understanding. I could be corrected. But the other thing is that Salmo has the only high school and elementary school in the area. So all the students from Area G go to Salmo. So Salmo is the benefit of this service without paying anything. And I'm not complaining because that's their choice, but I'd like to point out, look, you know, it is an overall service, or at least for all the people in Area G, and even if it is part of it or most of it's located right in the village of Salmo. The fact that they get away without paying is a slight burr under my saddle, but just a slight one, because I think for what we're paying, it's really not. Yeah, you think about where our educational sources are that actually receive the benefits of those programs.
Director Weatherhead.
Thank you, through the chair. Last year when I got an email from them to pay this $1,000, I actually was thrown right off because they didn't really provide me any information where this was coming from, and I was paying the Village of New Denver, which I found super confusing. And so this year I had a little bit, thanks to Todd, I had a better understanding before. But now we're paying this from rural admin. I know it's not a huge amount, but yet we have our municipalities also a part of this actual program. So why, it just specifically, why does it come from rural admin exclusively?
So the information Todd, sorry, through the chair.
Oh, no, go ahead, we're just adding to the speakers list, carry on.
The information Todd on the agenda provided shows the municipal contributions, right? So the municipalities do contribute significantly to the overall program. So if you actually look at the municipal contributions, City of Castlegar 6,000, City of Nelson 9,000, Village of New Denver 1,000, Village of Silverton 1,000, Village of Lacasse 1,000. So Castle, all of these municipalities do contribute to the program. What the focus or what that is in detail, I can't tell you, but as that report outlines, there's an overall funding of for 2023, including Columbia Basin Trust component of 89,000 for the region.
What is not clear if New Denver's 1,000 was their 1,000 or Director Hoff's 1,000. Todd, do you know conclusively that the money came from a municipal budget? You looked at the budget, or are we guessing?
I'm just making some notes to start putting their feet to the fire a little bit more to provide these details without us having to ask. So I'll talk with Kayla. I don't have that information, but I just wanted to make a general comment. So as I've been exploring this program a little bit more, and Kayla confirmed this as well, you know, you have these, there's a proactive piece to this program, which is primarily the education piece. So they do school kids programs, and they'll do workshops of electric fences and other things like that. And that's planned in, and that is a predetermined cost. And then there's a reactionary component to their program, which you can never predict. So, I mean, New Denver might have a really, really rough year and maybe use up a little bit more of the resources to do that, where somebody else might have a lighter year. It's not predictable, and there are areas where these services overlap. And a further complexity is they also have provincial partners too, the conservation service and other things too. So it's a super complex program, and there's a certain amount of, these municipalities put in various fixed amounts, the regional district puts in various amounts, and how much of those dollar values are spent in that area is not, it's gonna fluctuate from year to year. And I think that's just the nature of the program. We're dealing with wild animals that, there might come in Nelson more than come in that year than last year. So I think that's just something we need to accept, is that's just the nature of running a program like that. anyways, that was just a commentary on how it works and how the, you know, how it's done.
Thank you. So supplemental, just.
Yes.
I just, sort of paid attention through the year and found, yes, a greater value was, being contributed to the village of Nikas of our area that may have been based on need, but we don't have, garbage pickup for stickers to go on, anything in rural and unpaid, the same amount by grants, same amount as the village is paying. So it just felt messy and so, thank you for that. So,
Okay, so thanks. We're not gonna solve future years here, but we do need to come up with a plan for this year onwards. We're not the province, we're not CDT, but we're being asked to step in partly. So for the first time, Director Hanegraaff, and for the second, Watson, Popoff, and Cunningham. Director Hanegraaff, please, your thoughts.
Well, I'm just a bit confused too. I'm wondering, so the bracket after Castlegar says Robson, Blueberry, Thrums, and Udashenia. Robson and Udashenia fall within Area J, and Thrums is in Area I. And then we go on to say the rural areas and list I and J. So are those three places being funded twice, once from Castlegar and then later on, or not later on, but you get what I mean, through the rural areas? I'm just trying to wrap my brain around it.
Dr. Uli, maybe?
So
Uli.
there is no distinct areas. It's not like the electoral areas where I say, these are large regional programs that have artificially created some boundaries for the respond to and provide services. So it is issue and complaint based, as Todd pointed out. It changes from year to year. They are trying to provide education. That is a point based, right? Where they are going and where they are providing education. There is no defined boundaries to it, and it is hard to say, or you can't determine if anything is twice funded, because it is all, in the end, one thought, couple of staff that provide the services there that need to be funded from somewhere, and trying to put sharp boundaries around that is impossible.
Fair enough. Further, Director Hanegraaff?
Yeah, so what's the purpose of the bracket then? Like, why, I understand the bears don't respect our boundaries between our areas and our cities and all of that. And I do support the program. I think it's important, but I don't know why the bracket is there then. If we're talking about Castlegar and we go and list the rural areas, I'm just trying to understand it.
So probably an historic reason for it, how certain staff that responds to that area was allocated. It may have had some historic discussions too, before I was here, or dealt with this, who is contributing or who not. But like I said, for me, it's a relatively artificial boundary that is drawn here, that they are trying to report out on in regards to specific issues in that area. And as you can see, some areas are a lot larger than others. Draw the whole area from Yak to, I forget, is it Samuel or Nelson that we have? It's one area identified. That's a huge area, right? So, like I said, these are relatively artificial. In the end, you need to see this as one comprehensive program overall, with some exceptions, as the Valhalla component that Director Popov pointed out. But overall, it's one program. They respond on an as needed basis.
So what I hope we're gonna zero in on after this second round, and for me about the fifth round, is we have an ask for a 3-year agreement, and we should find a number we're comfortable with that we can at least propose And Todd has lots of notes he's taking. This will become his second favorite endeavor. Your first being the annual resource recovery fees and charges bylaw amendment, and this will become your second favorite annual sorting out exercise. So we do have, I think we're good, Director Hanegraaff was good. So we're gonna go another round, Watson, Popoff, Cunningham, and if anybody wanted to propose numbers or different numbers as we go through that journey, that'd be great. Watson, please go ahead.
And thank you, I wasn't finished my first chat, so
I kind of realized that, yes.
it's okay, I won't hold you to it. Couple notes, I'm sorry to the staff on the side, it's when we have side conversations, the owl picks it up, so that's why I was telling you they can't hear online when you guys talk, I'm sorry.
That's my bad. Except the South shape.
Yeah, so sorry about that. To Director Hanegraaff, I do know that what you're looking at in brackets is wild safes area where coordinators apply. So that's one area that Wild Safe would be having a coordinator. So the way that they design their service areas is not our service areas based on our jurisdiction. So that's the complication here. So Castlegar, Robson, that's one coordinator's area. In terms of the actual overall ask, first, I'm going to say that we are not obligated to replace CBT funding. In fact, this is the fourth request come our way in the last 2 years that is to cover what CBT is no longer funding. I am not okay with us being the backfill for that. And that's not speaking to the program itself and its importance. It's just saying that local government is not your backfill when CBT changes directions. I fully support the work. It's essential given we live in Bear, Attractant, and well, our whole area is still dealing with tons of abandoned orchards based on what Ministry of Agriculture did in the 1900s. So we have a lot of Bear Attractants, and managing that is critical. That being said, I do not think we are the backbone for that. What I would propose is that we let WildSite determine via direct contact with each electoral area municipality what they need. It's less confusing because what's occurring is we are by default becoming a granting agency that, well, Todd and Uli have done excellent work to fill in all of the gaps on our questions and have not once complained about needing to provide information for a program we don't provide, we just fund. It's beyond what we should be asking of staff and what we should be putting on staff. If it was a straightforward grant, we didn't have all these questions, no problem. It's way too much to try and figure this stuff out. And because we augment our programs as Area H does, I fund Grizzly Bear Solutions. You'll see it on Thursday. I give them $5,000 a year for grizzly-proof bear bins. So I would much rather see my ability with my community development grants to be very specific to my area. Yes, Caslo, I will partner with you. It's actually through the village of Caslo then. I have much more direct contact with it, and I can be very specific and say, and this area needs to do a feeding families program that takes the food from their harvest and moves it over here. So you can be very specific with our grants. So I would be opposed to moving forward on this, and I would go back to WildSafe and say you can work with each EA municipality to determine your program. That would be my direction.
Did you, there's two more speakers for the second time. I haven't entered in chat, but it may be something as an option along that the board directs staff to ask WildSite what individual contributions they would seek from our 11 electoral areas for 2024 program funding. Perhaps something along that line.
The only thing I would indicate is I would no longer ask staff to do anything with it. So we would just let them know we're not funding it. You are more than welcome to go to each EA to request funding through their granting program. So it would just be ending it. It would be saying for WildSafe, please go to the EA directors, they can fund at their leisure. And then staff are done with this. And you can focus on a million other things you have to do that we actually do.
That humor of the day then, how would that remain as Mr. Johnson's second favorite annual exercise?
Don't worry, I got a mosquito program
Okay,
for them.
so we don't have any alternative wording yet, Uli, and then we'll go to two more directors. We need something on the
Briefly, we do get as well annual reports from that. Obviously, that would end in that format.
Supplemental to that.
Yes.
Just to note that what I'm finding by working with the village of Castle or these individual with the municipalities is we have much more direct contact with them, which is not anyone's fault here. It's just I'm able to go to the village and say, so how's it working with you guys? I can see the coordinator on the street. So we would still get that kind of information. But wouldn't be through you guys, where you don't have that direct contact to what's happening in 11 different areas.
Okay. Director Popoff, then Cunningham. What's yours?
Through the chair, I've met with Wildlife BC for the last 4 or 5 years, trying to figure out how the program works, and I think the best result is what Todd has done currently, what we have, because nobody could give me a specific answer. And the reason that I was contributing to New Denver was New Denver did not realize that we had the rural program going, and they figured that REH was not contributing directly to WildSafe BC because the education program was at the Lucerne School in New Denver. So I did contribute 1 year. Then when I started investigating, find out no, it's not working. So there is a program coordinator in New Denver. I think it was Cora Sagan. That was the program coordinator. One of them was there. Direct contact with them, what they were providing was good. So I had good information coming back. I think probably the thing that I did was contribute to New Denver for not necessarily their portion. I believe they contributed also $1,000 on top of that. But with myself, I know the direction I'm going in, but Valley Wilderness providing that. And if we go with Director Watson suggested or whatever, I might do a community development grant of $1,000, period.
Thank you. Director Cunningham.
Thank you. I'd like to point out that filling out 11 different applications for funds costs money, staff time, and things like that. Also, what we're doing is we may be fractionating an overall program. And that bothers me, as I've already explained about. So that's, I would like to move the following recommendations that we have appointed to me. Okay, then the board, it'll be the first paragraph, board approve the Regional District enter into an agreement with the British Columbia Conservation Foundation for the WildSafe BC program for the period of February 1, 24, ending on December 31st, 26. And the chair and corporate officer be authorized to sign the necessary documents, and further that the annual funding for the WildSafe BC program not exceed an annual cost of $20,000, period. And that means that's for this year. And you have the understanding, of course, that you want to do something next year, let's work it out for next year, but let's see things in place for this year. And further, the cost be paid for service.
So do we have a second of this recommendation? Second for discussion purposes, Director Vandenberg.
Just for clarity, is that then staying with the existing level, what you're proposing? When you say 20,000, is that, that's the 15 is the current, and supplemental.
Yes, go ahead.
I appreciate, this is an important program. Please don't, I appreciate it. And whatever happens today, I'll ensure that this information is available to the constituents in our area. I don't support the motion as it is. I like the idea of dealing with it on an individual level, as Director Watson has pointed out. And so that's where my leniency is going to be. There are some missing pieces of information here. And I think with the missing information, it's difficult to increase funding and to replace a lost funder. One of the key pieces is it's not understood how each area ties into this beyond the RDCK component. And it's also unclear as to what level of education service we get in return. And so with not knowing that, I don't feel comfortable in any increase with the program. I would rather see it go to, we manage it individually on our own.
You're speaking against the recommendation. I am. Director Graham, then Watson. Director Graham, please go ahead.
Sorry, just trying to unmute. Through the chair, I would echo Kelly's comments and say that when I first read this, my first instincts were that I felt that this should be something that should be coming to grants as opposed to be coming through rural administration. So I'm just going to echo, I would speak in opposition and I would support Director Watson's approach. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'm gonna speak in opposition to the motion, as you guess. The two notes I want to make, one is that in terms of the grant applications, staff would not be making those grant applications. It would be WildSafe making those applications. And we're already doing that with other components to this program. So I feel like going through the granting stream is how we will actually have a much more clear awareness of what's happening in our areas than we currently do. It also, you know, again, the program's really valid. It helps us customize it to what are the other individual issues that we want to address, such as the grizzly bear bin. So I can put that all under one grant. So I do prefer that approach. And so I'll speak in opposition to the motion. And Village of Castle's already emailing saying, Castle is going ahead with this. Can we count on your 2 grant? So it's way easier that way for me. And so you have Dave Goff on the list as well now for the first time.
Yeah, Popoff and David off, please go ahead. Oh, well, no, on the motion for the first time on the recommendation, Director Popoff
Yeah.
and David off.
Well, thank you, Chair. And I would speak in support of this motion because it's a worthwhile program and the cost generally goes for the coordinator for the area. So if we do individual grants that changes the process completely, might not have the program for 2024. My recommendation or my suggestion would be is I'm in support of the motion, but we review it next year so that, and we contact WildSafe knowing what so they're aware of what we intend to do. Okay, so that's why I support it.
Thank you. Quickly before going to Director Davidoff, I saw 3 jackets go on and I can feel the chill on my back. CEO, just for another time.
I can turn it off. I would make it way too warm.
But it cut in without any pre-warming. And what's going on? Did they fix the air handling units yet? Uli to the rescue. Thank you. Thank you.
Sure, if it could just on Director Popoff's comment there,
Yes.
is that the current motion does have a contract through the end of 2026, so there would be no trigger to bring this back for discussion for 2025. So I just want to make you aware that the intent was to do this year by year. The current motion does not direct staff to bring that back to talk about it during next year's budget deliberations.
Supplemental in that case, go ahead, Director Popoff.
Then I'd like to make amend the motion, funded for the $20,000 for 2024 only.
That's, I wouldn't necessarily. Is that a friendly amendment? Director?
That's a friendly amendment because that was my intention actually.
I'm gonna take it as a friendly amendment. You guys can shoot me down.
Yeah.
I recognize Wildside might be asking for a 3-year contract.
Yeah,
is that the
exactly. So
case?
what I heard was a 3-year contract. So we have a 3-year agreement and only determine the funding for the first year.
So
The agreement?
this would only make sense if it was a 1-year agreement for 2024.
1 year sum, well, we talk about.
Well,
I'm sorry.
well, just to confirm that is, I'm gonna say as a friendly amendment, 1 year, 20,000, figure it out later. Anybody wants to challenge the chair on that? But if that's the case, then I'd like to continue with the speakers list, which is not quite yet you, sir. It will be, unless you want to object to the.
Well, that's the challenge that you're offering through the chair is now this becomes.
No, either, Director, you either challenge the chair that my interpretation of the intent, which is the amendment, friendly amendment, is correct or incorrect. If you challenge the chair, we won't talk about it, we'll go to a 2/3 vote. Either we're talking about a 1-year contract, 20,000, 2024, we'll vote on that. Do you wish to challenge the chair?
Without explanation.
Absolutely, that's how challenging the chair works. Or you can continue with after you place the speakers list. Thanks. I want to be too, but that's the only way to get through something like this.
Chair, point of order.
Director.
Chair, point of order.
I'm giving you the floor. Go ahead.
Okay, I want to do a point of order first. So what you did for the heating is a point of privilege. So that's fine. You can interrupt proceedings for that. What Director Vandenberg just did is if he's doing a challenge to the chair, Robert's rules provides that first of all, the chair asks the rest of the assembly is the chair sustained. So that's,
Correct. And we didn't get there, Director.
Okay.
Director Vandenberg stated he is not challenging the chair, but I do appreciate, and go ahead with the rest of your explanation.
yeah, I just want to
interpretation
make
of the
sure,
procedure.
I participate in an organization, we challenge the chair like every third motion, so with 1,000 delegates, so just so we see this all the time. So the bottom line is that what happens with a challenge to the chair, and there's been confusion at the board table about this before. So basically, if somebody challenges the chair, what ends up happening is that the first thing that the chair does is asks for a vote, is the chair sustained? If the chair is sustained, okay, then what happens is that's the end of the challenge. If the chair is not sustained, then the person who challenged the chair can then explain why they're challenging the chair. And then we have a
Director
vote.
Davidoff, I think that's sufficient because I almost heard another point of order that would stop your explanation. So I would prefer that we recognize, I think we have a procedural weakness maybe in our bylaw, when that bylaw is being clarified exactly how we're going to deal with challenging the chair. I don't think I made a bad choice. It's not being challenged. And I would like Director Davidoff to, in order to ward off other points of order, please, you're on the speaker's list next to speak to the motion on the floor.
Yeah, thank you. And I concur with your explanation that we need to straighten this out because I've seen confusion on this before. Okay, so the reason I wanted to speak is that we have valuable services in our areas and throughout the regional district, and this is one of them. Like everybody agrees that, yeah, this is worthy of supporting, but these services are cobbled together financially from diverse sources that are not secure and not certain. If we believe something's valuable for the whole RD, then what we should be doing is saying, okay, let's establish a service across the regional district that we all pay into, including the munis and rural, and we basically then support the service up to a certain amount of money. But we get ourselves into this mess, constantly where we're trying to find a way, and then inevitably with rural directors, it ends up, okay, well, you know what? I'm going to provide grants to pay for the ongoing operational costs of whatever it is that we're supporting. And then we get into a situation where there's an expectation from service providers that the grant will continue every year to sustain the operational cost. And then what ends up happening is that we're sitting there saying, hold on a sec here, this is what requisition is for. Grants are for one-off expenses, not to keep paying for operational costs. So we got to look at this a lot better. And I like this conversation that this is being brought up. Like, how the heck does this thing work? I like Henny's question that, okay, hold on a sec. Are we paying twice, or are we paying once, or what are we even paying?
So I do appreciate that, Director, and it would have been maybe good as a placeholder, as a conversation, and maybe in a future agenda. We are in the middle of a motion, so I also would like to hear your support or non-support for the recommendation.
Yeah, so
on the
the
table.
problem is that if we don't support it, then we're going to be coughing up more grants. Is that the effect of the motion?
The motion right now is to support for 2024 only in the amount of $20,000.
Right.
So all the other conversation, which you bring up as valid points, would occur after this recommendation and this year's funding.
Okay, but if we don't support this, does that mean that we're going to be coughing up more grants? Like, what's the consequence of not supporting it?
I don't know, but we'll know.
Well, could we ask that question to the CAO or to the CAO, I guess.
Sure, if you want, Stuart, the option to support any program with grants that fall within the LGA allowances for grant funding.
Yeah, through the chair, there's no restriction on providing grants as long, because the provision of the grants is based on the societal nature of the organization that you're supporting. if it's an annual operating grant that continues, there's always a risk that once that director leaves office, that doesn't continue. But that's a risk that absent a specific service establishment for that contribution, you're not going to avoid.
Thank you. So I guess I have no choice but to support, otherwise I'm impacting what we believe is a valuable service. So that's the problem with this system that we're got ourselves into. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Director. Do I have further speakers? Cunningham, please to close perhaps on
Yes,
the,
we're closing. I understand where the other directors are coming from, and I appreciate that. The reason for the motion as stated is that it will not, at this late date, which is 2024, it will give them continuity of funding. The other thing is, I don't have any extra grant funding, so if I like this or don't like it, I'm sorry, I'm done. And they'll just have to go someplace else. Because my grant funding is also fully committed, and I've been very, very careful about how I do it. If you want to give me an extra $1,500 to $2,000, Chair, from somebody else's grant funding, you can give me a grant, and then I'll be glad to fund this, because I think it's a very valuable program.
thank you. And Christine, can you read back the key part, the first paragraph, I guess, of the revision? Yes, that the grant period has to be amended in the first paragraph, and the amount is the same for the second, but for 1 year. You want to read it back?
I'll read the whole thing.
Sure.
That the board approved the RDC services agreement with the British Columbia Conservation Foundation for their Wild Safe BC program for the period of February 1st, 2024 and ending on December 31st, 2026.
No, it would be 2024.
2024, thank you. And that the chair and the corporate officer be authorized to sign the necessary documents. And further, that the annual funding for the Wild Safe BC program not exceed the annual cost of $20,000 for 2024. And further, that the cost be paid from service F101 Rural Administration transferred through Environmental Services A1.
Thank you. And I see I have one more comment, Director Hanegraaff, please go ahead.
If we're funding it for a year, shouldn't the end date be January 31st, 2025? Otherwise, we're funding for 11 months.
Just heard a note, it is a seasonal program, so it wouldn't be occurring through January.
Oh, never mind.
That it would be wrapped. So it would be within one fiscal year for us.
Yeah.
Although this year, I bet you the Bears were awake in January. But thank you for that note. Further discussion on the recommendation?
Just on the recommendation, if I may, through the chair,
Yes.
I heard Christine read out out of service 101.
Yes, 101,
101.
101, rural admin. Further discussion? Not seeing anyone opposed to this recommendation. We're in committee, so on report, I have Watson, Weatherhead, Vandenberg, and Graham opposed, 4 opposed out of 11, any others opposed. That is carried, we'll go to board tomorrow. I hope the rural chair doesn't have to, maybe the chair. We'll see where it goes tomorrow. Thank you, good conversation. Director Davidoff is spot on. Maybe we'll have a conversation at the end of a RAC meeting sometime some months on after we've received Wild Safe's reaction to this. Because we didn't give them 3 years. We didn't leave them short this year, which Director Cunningham, I think that was a good choice. And we will see this again. I wouldn't mind doing the community works fund application and getting up and having a stretcher. Do people want to have a stretch right now? What's the pleasure? Stand up right now? Uli's here, so if we do community works, we can let Uli go.
Chair.
I have Chair. It's Director Graham. I have a conflict of interest with this point.
With the
community
works application, well, let's do 9-1. Quickly, I'd like to hear Director Vandenberg something pertaining to the last recommendation?
Not that it's gonna have any change to it, but you said out of 11, and I only count.
No, we were only 10. Sorry, you're correct. 4 opposed out of 10, it's still carried. Good point to keep me honest.
Okay.
So we will move to 9.1. So yes, Director Graham, if you have the appearance of a conflict of interest, please make your statement.
Sorry, I don't have the paper with me, but I do have a conflict of interest with this because we do act as a subcontract for DDC Contracting, who's named in this application. So I would say I'm just gonna leave the meeting right now. And if someone can text me or email me when you're ready to have me back, then I will come back.
We will do that. Thanks for noting that. So we now have 9 members. And we will move to 9.1, Community Works application, Ainsworth Sewer System Corporation, sewer outfall and upgrades. Micah prepared this report. That'll be, if we want a brief explanation from staff on what it's about, but it's a Community Works funding contribution in the amount of $100,000 from RVD. You want to pull notes from any staff member on what's involved here? Or questions? Oh, recommendations moved. Watson, seconded. Popoff. Discussion on the recommendation. Vandenberg, go ahead.
And I don't remember reading what the total value of the project is for the $100,000. I'm looking through it again and I don't see it as quickly as I need.
Director Watson, sure Watson would have the answer to that.
So the project that they applied for is part of a 4-phase project. And so what you're looking at is 100% of this phase of the project. They funded all the pre-planning and engineering work. And so it depends on how you look at it. The first phase they funded, which was around $70,000, and that was out of pocket, their users. And then the second phase, which is the one that we're funding, is 100% of the second phase. And that's the actual construction work that was determined by the engineering work they funded.
Supplemental.
Go ahead.
That is, the beneficiaries of this is 11 residential lots, a motel, and a 2-bedroom residence. That's it.
Through the chair.
Through the chair, that is the full service area for the Ainsworth Sewer Corporation. And their outfall limits them to that amount of connections. They're working with the Ainsworth Resort, Yakinuki and Tanaka, to assess if they can then eventually amalgamate their system into theirs for a longer term approach to things. But at this time, the requirements on their system were immediate. So that is not the current solution, but they are limited and that's the amount that they can have on their system. They can't have any more at this time.
Supplemental, if I may.
Go ahead. One more.
So
Yep.
is one of the beneficiaries then Yakinuki as well, the resort?
Not at this time, no.
Could be a future partner doing this work.
Through the chair. So the Ainsworth Resort runs its own wastewater treatment plant. The notion is that Ainsworth Sewer Corporation, which back in the 90s, we actually looked at acquiring them, and the state of their reserves and the state of their infrastructure was declined by us. So they continue to operate as an independent organization up to this day. So the long-term plan, when I need to acknowledge Uli and Micah, who worked with me and the corporation significantly to help them understand how to plan for the future. So currently Yakinuki, to your question, does not benefit from this, but the long-term plan is to look at can they amalgamate with the wastewater treatment plant, which is literally over here, and they're here if you're looking at Ainsworth Fort Lake. So that the whole community could be benefiting from the system. And that's just, it's a much bigger conversation for the resort to consider that. So that's down the road. Currently, the one thing that was contingent on us providing this, that Uli was, thank you so much, Uli, was we sat down with them several times to talk about asset management planning and how to plan for that. So the budget has to include, and again, Uli had to show me where it was because I couldn't see it the other day. They now have a reserve that is specific to the asset management plan, which they funded. And that was what was the criteria for us to even put this in front of you.
Thank you. Director Cunningham.
Yes, thank you. And I understand that they are not eligible for Canada Works grants or any of the federal granting programs or federal provincial granting programs. because of the nature of the fact that they're residing? Or could you perhaps fill me in on that through the chair?
Well,
If
this,
you know the answer,
well, this is federal funding. We're providing them through the Community Works Grant, so they do qualify. Because they're meeting the asset management criteria. If they were to apply directly to the federal government or the province, because they're not owned by local government, they would not qualify, but Community Works does allow us to do that. So our water systems, this is the only sewer system I believe we funded, because I think it's the only one out there. in our rural
I
communities.
sort of think of our community works grant as a separate thing from the federal Richland grants, although I realize, of course, that if they are provided with the federal government, there is no gas tax grants. But thank you.
I appreciate concerns, because I wondered at first too, but I mean, Mike is still doing some of this work for us and has continuity, and he and Uli would have gone over the eligibility, so I kind of got over my anxiety of a week ago. Further questions on this application?
One note to you, your anxiety helped me get drilled down into the application post all of our work. And then I found the reserve contribution because that was critical.
Okay, so seeing no further discussion, is anyone opposed to the recommendation? Seeing none, so that is carried. We'll go to board tomorrow. So before moving to 9.2, which will be more than a couple minutes, I think we should take a break. It's 14 past here. Is 5 or 6 minutes enough for everybody to get up and stretch?
If I can boil water in 5 to 6 minutes.
Let's go till 25 past. We'll go like 10 minutes. Everybody get a good stretch and then come back. Thanks very much. For a minute.
But I just can't be part of any decision. You know what? Okay.
We already knew that.
What?
We already knew that.
Oh, yeah, I know. It doesn't happen that often. It's only been maybe 3 or 4 times so far. Especially when sometimes we're mentioned in the application, like early on, and I'm sure. But even if it's a good chance that we're gonna get the work, I still don't know. I would rather not. Penny. Hello. Oh.
So we're 1 minute from calling back to order and almost everybody's sitting down. Wow, this is so cool.
Still cold though.
It's chilly here. That's it. Everyone's sitting down and hunkering down.
Sometimes in the near future,
Sure.
I'd like to talk.
Okay, so we are calling to order again at 25 past the hour, depending what time zone you're in. We're in item 9.2. So, you know, we have a long day planned for February 21st planning workshop. And we've had quite a bit of, there was the orientation information, and then staff have pointed all the rural directors again to what you could, would, or should have absorbed a year ago, where you can read it now. In anticipation of making the most of the 21st, we're giving Nelson and our planners some time to just kind of highlight and make what is, highlight what is, not what will be. And make sure you have an opportunity to ask questions about what is your OCP mean? What is in place for zoning or not? What is now in place? If you have questions about, oh, and how will that turn out to look in June, I will ask you to park that question, write it down and bring it to February 21st. Because there's no way we're gonna answer all the questions about what the transitions and the new acts from the province are gonna cause us in terms of impact on staff, taxation, whatever. So really, hopefully you will ask questions about what we have now in the system and not try and ask too many questions about what's gonna happen later. So Nelson has, I think, a very focused initial bit of a presentation. And then we'll see whether it's Stephanie or Dan or whoever's maybe gonna get bits and pieces of infill information. And we'll go to questions. And Nelson, please let us know when you think is the best time for people to ask questions. But this is still a meeting. This is not a workshop, so I'm gonna do a speaker's list. Nelson, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Chair. And thanks for the introduction. I'm going to add just a bit more to it to share with you what we had planned. There's three main chunks covered as I see it. We wanted to begin with an understanding of what a planner does, and that's why I invited Stephanie to share some of that background. I'm going to then cover the background information that we're providing for you on eScribe, things you should know in preparation. There's even things that you might want to park somewhere for future review. We're going to cover the existing work plan, and we can go in as great a detail or as less detail as you want, because this is not new information, and you can study it later if you wish. So cut me off if you think it's too much information. And the last part is the new provincial legislation, the changes to housing, and what that impacts the BCK. So we'll invite Dan and come to speak to that. But to kick off, I want to turn it over to Stephanie to talk about what a planner is and what planning is and what a planner does.
Thanks, Nelson. So, what is planning? Well, as you can see from the slide, there are several accepted definitions of what planning is, and I'll just let you peruse over those. For me, after over 20 years in the profession, perhaps my favorite and what I feel like sometimes is the most relevant definition for the work that I do would be planning is the science of muddling through, which I think advocates for an incremental approach to planning. Planning at its most fundamental level refers to both a process and a profession. It's a professional discipline whose planning practitioners possess technical information, analytical tools, and problem-solving approaches informed by both research and honed throughout our practice. Ultimately, planning helps to create communities of lasting value. So just a little bit about what is the role of a planner. Well, we protect the public interest. We are obliged to act with professional responsibility. We practice with ethics and abide by a statement of values, all of which I'll dive into in a little more detail in the next couple of slides. We look at the big picture. We gather and analyze all relevant information, whether it's a land use application or a planning project. We employ communication, consultation, and collaboration in the work that we do. We facilitate and move forward the implementation of plans and projects, which we're going to talk about the work plan in the next few slides as well. We monitor and review results and outcomes of these plans and projects. And ultimately, we're always learning, listening, understanding, and evolving in our practice. And just to stay on that big picture thing, planners make the future a discernible part of today's decision making. So just a little bit about our professional code of conduct. A planner has a responsibility to the public interest. And really protecting the public interest is a key responsibility for us planners. To clarify, public opinion differs from the public interest, and the two shouldn't really be confused. Public opinion is what various stakeholders think and say about an issue, and determining the public interest is really an attempt to identify and address underlying concerns and to balance those concerns against one another. And sometimes those interests can't easily be included as part of our public outreach and to reach a professional planning recommendation. Ultimately, examples of those interests that can't easily be represented at the table include future generations, the natural environment, or the cultural environment, just to name a few. And so this requires that big picture thinking and analysis. Ultimately, a planner's recommendation constitutes an independent professional planning opinion, and it represents a best fit in balancing multiple interests. We all have a professional responsibility to our employer, and that's to provide independent professional opinions, undertaking our work with diligence and appropriate preparation, informing our employer if there's a conflict, and not accepting any financial or any offers, financial or otherwise, that could affect our planning advice. Our responsibility to, we also have a responsibility to our profession, and that includes maintaining our awareness of contemporary planning philosophy, theory, and practice with ongoing professional development, also known as lifelong learning. And we're also not to engage in any questionable conduct that would cast doubt on our professional competence or integrity. So just a statement of our professional values. We recognize that our work does have long-term implications, and we understand it has a potential impact on many jurisdictions and interests. Planners believe that both natural and cultural environments must be valued, and we assume the role of steward, balancing that preservation with sustainable development. We also believe that the long-term future is unpredictable and that adaptable responses to deal positively with that uncertainty must be developed in the work that we do. We respect and protect diversity in values, cultures, economic, ecosystems, buildings, environments, and distinct places. And we seek to balance the interests of communities with the interests of individuals. We believe in meaningful public participation, and we seek to articulate the needs of those whose interests have not been represented. This also includes communicating the importance of our professional values to the public and to our elected officials, which we're doing here today. So I know I took you on a bit of a whirlwind of the planning profession, but I hope the last few slides have really helped to better inform you about what planning is and the role of a planner and what our conduct and values are, and that we're obliged to uphold as we move forward to talk about the work plan and Dana's presentation on the latest and greatest with relation to health. So just thank you.
Thanks. So we will have a bit of a speakers list evolving. I have to caution you though, Stephanie, appreciate your words, but you can't give me too many openings for bad humor. So planning is the science of muddling through. And of course, governance is the art of muddling through. I think that's what we do. It's not a science. And I do appreciate your words, respect and integrate needs of future generations as opposed to what, in the worst case, the governance side would consider the needs of future elections, because it is a generational process. So now from me, we have Directors Cunningham and Popoff. I don't see anybody online yet. Please go ahead.
What you said. However, the words, this is a company that's been around for 30 years plus, the word sustainable development. Isn't that a bit of an oxymoron? Because how you can keep continuing, well, put it this way, eventually there has to be an end someplace. Not to the word, but you understand what I'm saying. When we're talking about finite resources, water, some cases air, the number of people in the world and what the future say, well, listen, you know, by the time we get to the year, the next century, we're going to be hitting how many, 13 billion or something like that. And that's not sustainable. So I appreciate the work. This is a little aside because the words came out to make everybody happy. You can continue to develop and we can sustain it. The answer is no. But in my opinion, and I'd like to comment, please.
Sangeeta has some thoughts on that. I just saw her.
Yeah, I just want to share that, I guess, a visual. I consider sustainability a boat with a slow leak in it. We're constantly bailing out the boat. And I think planning, the profession itself is trying to maintain that equilibrium between drowning versus not. In this case, sustainable development is about ensuring that development is sustainable for the conditions at that time. And that's why muddling through is good enough.
Thank you. With that, to the chair.
Yeah, Director Popoff.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. What perks my interest is public interest. Now, we as elected officials, we basically look at the public and we respond to the interests of the public. You know, if somebody wants a mosquito referendum, we go out there and do evaluations of what's required to find a service area, et cetera, do a survey. How do you gauge public interest?
Through the chair. That's a wonderful question, and I think it's an ongoing challenge. It's a slippery, wrinkly concept for professional planners as well. I think in my section of the presentation, I spoke about planners having a voice for those who aren't represented at the table. And so oftentimes in my experience, working on land use applications, we could be at a public hearing and property owners come out and perhaps they're upset with the development proposal, and we hear those voices at the public hearing. And I'll just use an example of maybe some type of densification. So perhaps there's a proposal for housing. It's a little denser than what the neighborhood's seen, and property owners are upset about that. And so that's all we hear at the public hearing. And so part of my job as a planner is to recognize right now our housing crisis, the situation within locally, provincially, and nationally, and representing those who may not be property owners, but who in our community are seeking safe and affordable accommodation and bringing their voice to the table. So that's part of the broader public interest, where those property owners who are coming up to the public hearing are certainly voicing their public opinion. And so we need to look at both sides of that. And to me, that's part of representing the entire public interest and having that big picture thinking.
supplement?
Sure, go ahead.
I'm new to zoning, and we're going to be developing zoning in the northern portion of Area H. And my concern is we've got different communities in the areas, and when you say public interest, you know, is this where you gather the input from the public rather than saying that, you know, because all the laws look the same, you shall have this and this is our recommendation for it? Or does the public get to decide how they want their community zone?
Through the chair, I think that community engagement and public input, whether it's through the creation of a zoning bylaw, is a significant part of the process. But public interest to me is also representing those needs that aren't necessarily coming out of that community meeting to discuss a zoning bylaw. I would say the public interest is really trying to represent what's going to happen in the future, to speak for, I guess, areas that maybe the community is not bringing up. So to look at the natural environment. I'm just thinking, for example, if everyone came out in your area with regards to land use regulations and said, look, we feel like development should be in the riparian area, and you know, we feel like that's a great place for future development. Well, part of my professional planning advice would say, okay, here are the values of the riparian area and why you shouldn't be developing there. So if we let public opinion outweigh planning analysis, you know, in my opinion, that wouldn't be good planning. And if an elected body, whether it's a council or a regional board, is just interested in listening to public opinion at a public hearing or at a community meeting, then you could be missing the overall public interest. And I guess the argument could be made, but why do you need planning advice if you're just going to listen to the opinions of community members?
Then just one more supplement.
Okay, go ahead, and then we'll go to Director Weatherden. Yes?
And you know, being new to planning and zoning and referring to what's going to be happening, and the planners do a fantastic job within the regional district. I have no complaint about the planners, but I could see a possible conflict in the community, the director and the planner. Engaging public interest, exactly what you mentioned. Yeah, if they don't want a store there, and the planner says, well, it's best for the public to have a store there, so they don't have to travel all the way to Nelson from basically Hills or whatever. So that's my concern about it. And I don't know, if you don't want to respond, that's great, just a comment I'd like to, but if you'd like to respond, I do appreciate that.
Sure, go ahead.
I'm happy to respond, and I think you hit the nail on the head in terms of the wrinkliness sometimes, and that big picture thinking and analysis involves a whole bunch of competing interests, and so we would have to take all of that into account, working with the community. So for me, that would be an exciting planning process to embark on.
The biggest pressure against the big picture planning values is probably NIMBYism. We hear it all the time. Maybe that's why Bill 44 and Bill 46 and those kind of bills are in place now. Director Weatherden.
Thank you, to the chair. About 10 years ago, there was a craft course in a way that I wished I hadn't, and now it comes in handy. But my question is after the fact of the public hearing and all of this great work that the planning department does, if everything that was brought to the RAC and to the board and to staff in the whole process of a subdivision, let's say, yet what was presented to the public was shown a certain way of what the engineers showed, what the proponents showed as being how things were going to be laid out, and then the public basically had no problem with that. But then out of the woodwork, after the zoning came through, the whole plan was actually changed by the engineer, meaning that the was not what the public had been delivered to the public in that rezoning. And it had quite a detrimental impact on the neighbors after the fact, which and back then we were told that was that for zoning. So how much, or it was out of your hands then. So once you've done your part, how much control do you have over that development after the fact? So
Through the chair,
Yes.
Unfortunately, I can't speak to that particular situation. Certainly what I know we try to do here when we do have land use applications such as that, is to tie a particular development proposal with the relevant tools so that what the board sees and makes a decision on, what the community sees throughout a process at the public hearing is what gets built on the ground. I've mentioned that I've been doing this for over 20 years and I've seen the good, the bad, and the ugly. So we've learned a lot from those types of experiences as to what types of tools we can use to help control that development. And there's various different types of applications that we can use. So if you're considering bylaw amendment applications, so maybe a change to the official community plan and the zoning bylaw, really the regional board should be looking at, are we comfortable with this proposed land use and scale and density? And then usually if it's a multifamily, commercial or industrial use, there'll be a related development permit application, should that proposal be approved, where we can really tie down the specifics of site planning and what that site would look like in terms of setbacks, vegetation, where the parking is, where the recycling pickup is. So it's also educating the public as to where to plug in the process. And unfortunately, I've seen that happen in the past, but I think we're very experienced here on our planning team, and we would employ the right tools to ensure that that would not happen.
could it still happen, sorry, something, it could still happen though, you could still lose the control after the fact if the developer change their scope of how they developed after we've done our part.
In my opinion, so if we're talking about what the development looks like on the ground, and we've gone through a development permit process, that is a binding contract between the regional district and the developer. And if that development proposal is not in substantial, I guess, agreement with what was approved, then we can come back to the board and challenge them, and they've broken that contract. And I have done that in the past in other organizations where I've worked. I can give you one example. I was the director of development services for the town of Oliver. We had a strip mall style development approved commercial retail, and to soften the parking in front, we had a whole series of landscape installations and screening. I think there was a problem with the staging of the construction. The parking lot was paved and no room left for vegetation. And we took the developer to task, and they changed it, and they had to break up pavement to plant the appropriate vegetation, which was agreed upon in the development permit contract. Good to know.
Yeah, I don't think we do many wide open rezonings, say residential to medium industrial. There's always site-specific criteria, limitations or elimination of other approved uses that remove. So I've seen a pretty good pattern there. I've also seen people who maybe ran out of money and didn't do what they're supposed to do in phase 2 or 3. There was.
Two questions. One, just speaking to what Director Frederick was speaking to, I know one of the areas that gets quite convoluted in the rural areas is we are not the subdivision approving authority. And so you can do a zoning change, but the actual subdivision approvals, Ministry of Transportation. And I've seen that go this way because it's not in our hands. We're a referral agency. If you have zoning, you have a bit more tools to actually have insight and opinion, and the planners can directly relate to the zoning. In my area where I have a subdivision with no zoning, even, waving big flags to Ministry of Transportation about privatizing a road to access properties is not relevant because it's not a part of the zoning. And so I think that distinction between a municipality and regional district is important to understand when it comes to the constraints of zoning, when it's talking about subdivision approvals. There's a separation to the authority.
It's both, so, yeah.
Yeah,
So,
and I did actually have.
oh, yeah, I was gonna put it back to Nelson, but go ahead. Oh,
And you can answer this question as well, combined with that one if you'd like, is that the one thing that I know for, especially with the new regulations, which I won't speak to, other than they apply to where servicing is available through the local government. So once I read that, I recognized that the majority of our unzoned areas with no servicing, none of these new regulations apply. So when you're doing planning, are you looking at and can you include the provision of servicing? Because when it comes to affordable housing, when it comes to any of the cluster development requirements, when it comes to short-term rental rules now, they all have to be contingent on being attached to a local government water and wastewater system, which is very few and far between in our region. So as part of your planning work, is servicing ever included in that? And I ask that because I think there's a big gap in even the province understanding how much zoning and lack of government-owned servicing is provided in our rural areas. So I think it becomes a larger part of the planning conversation in a rural area than it would say in a municipality, because it's a given in a municipality.
so we're also maybe jumping too much into the third part of your presentation. So maybe Nelson, you wanna talk about the work plan and then talk about the bit of what's coming? Would that fit, or do you have the quick answer now?
I noticed Corey had raised his hand.
Oh, and I can't see that. If you use chat, I have chat on all the time.
So I wonder if he was eager to pick up on that one, and if not, I can add to it as well.
Sure, Corey, go ahead without trying to solve what we're gonna do on February 21st. The floor is yours.
Yeah, through the chair, I just saw an opportunity to hopefully provide a quick answer to that. To answer Director Watson's question, the opportunity to address servicing can and does exist, first of all in zoning, but it also exists through the subdivision process as well, through a subdivision servicing bylaw, which Nelson will cover in the work plan portion. So two apparent opportunities there to address those items.
Couldn't have said it better. Thank you, Corey. Perfect.
So did you want to move into the next part then?
Absolutely. Before we leave the kind of the planning world, I just want to talk a bit more about the tools that we regularly use. And I know that was what I'm going to get into is also in response to what we heard from the directors. And you may know, because most of you participated in a series of questions. We asked all of you some questions that informed how we prepared our agenda for both today and the February 21st. And there was a specific request on the hierarchy of plans that I want to speak to in broad terms. And then there's a lot more detail we can get into later on your own or with us. But I wanted to point out the hierarchy of plans and how those then affect, how we basically implement the work we do. How do we plan for these areas? And of the highest order in our province here would be the regional growth strategy, one that we don't currently use in the RDCK, but other places across the province, often places that have experienced a lot more growth pressure, and that difficulty with jurisdictional boundaries really interfering in the management of that growth. Regional growth strategies are an effective tool. OCPs, below that official community plans, are that tool that we commonly use as the larger strategic document in guiding how we make decisions on land use planning matters. And just a side note that there's often sub-plans within that inform what goes into that OCP, and we use the example of the agricultural plan. Local area plans is a term that and you'll learn this if you haven't already, watch some of those videos from the Cowichan Valley Regional District and how they're using those in a way that in a municipality might you understand the concept of a neighborhood plan and how that forms a part of the bigger picture. In the same way, local area plans could form a part of, say, a harmonized official community plan for an entire regional district, which is what the CVRD has undertaken and others across the province. And then the final point to make on the hierarchy is implementation is really only successful through the zoning bylaw. Without it, that implementation isn't possible when it comes to applying or guiding direction on land use development decisions. I'm going to cover then the three things you absolutely need to know if you don't already. If somebody asks you about the OCP, note too, this is a distillation. Local Government Act has specific wording that I'm pulling from to narrow down in a very simple way to understand it, because it helps me certainly understand and convey that to the public. And it might be useful to you, but know that in that, when you do that, sometimes bits that some of the nuances miss. So feel free to call me up. We can talk more later about that. But the basic fundamentals are that an OCP is a statement of objectives and policies to guide decisions on planning and land use management. The second point is the consistency rule. Once you've adopted an OCP, everything that flows from that, the bylaws enacted or works undertaken, have to be consistent. If they're not, you still have an opportunity to go back and amend it, but that consistency rule still applies, and that was highlighted by Director Watson today too in our conversation around that one application we had, which is a really good point. And then the third point I'd make is that implementation really comes through zoning. Without it, you have very limited opportunity to regulate land. And the one exception I'm going to draw attention to, of course, is the development permit tool. That's the one exception of regulation that lives in an official community plan that does actually have an impact when it comes to land use on the ground.
So Nelson, I have a couple of questions that maybe if they might fit best if we just go to them now. I have Vandenberg and David.
Can you go back to the previous slide? Yeah. This is very, being visual, this is really important for me to help understand how the flow of information goes. What's missing here for me is authority. What is the authority? Because you talk about the LGA, we hear a lot about community charter. Don't know if the community charter has any influence in here at all. And the interesting thing that catches my mind is your conversation around the regional growth strategy. Of course, I go to the website to dial that in so that I can refresh and recall what that is. I can't find it. So then I just stop it.
So I'm
I'll
gonna
just save that.
jump in quickly before Nelson, because we did touch a little bit on this, and you realize we're in rural. Sometimes we invite municipalities, sometimes Director Page, and very often Director Main, it's nice, they will sit and listen. But we've always tried over the years, and I've been up at Shared Rural for quite a few years, of course, Director Cunningham for many, many years. We would want to not go too far down certain paths of conversation without inviting municipal directors and saying, we're gonna talk about something that can have a significant impact on you. And we want you to be part of the conversation so that we don't get kind of sometimes it's begrudging, like, well, what did you talk about and why? We are recording this right now for planning staff's benefit. So if I go back to Nelson, maybe you could tell us what your regional growth strategy is. Oh, I'm sorry, I thought you'd ask that question. What the most appropriate context to have that discussion is, the entire board or just rural?
Okay.
And I've misinterpreted that question, obviously.
If I can go for 1 second, Chair, I do have a slide that gets to Director Vandenberg's question.
Okay,
Right after.
and if I just might throw one, the other piece to that is, so it's around the authority. How did they come to be? What's mandated by the province? What's the freedom of will for us locally? And then how does bylaws themselves tie into and support that? Where do they come in? And what are the exceptions, that sort of thing? So this is really good. Great.
And again, to me, that was if the board makes certain decisions, not RAC recommending to the board. Please go ahead and then, I don't know if you also wanted Director David ask a question before you go to that next slide, but go ahead.
William, let's try it. Let's see if we can get a slide.
Okay.
Again, no, we're really high level. There's a lot of detail with all this stuff, and we'd be happy to get into it more in detail one-on-one, and that's in that subsequent slide. But we talked about kind of the 3 things to know in OCPs. Here's the 4 things to know when it comes to regional growth strategies, because it's pretty similar. What you're going to see is similar to an OCP. So it's a strategy to promote human settlement. So again, we're talking about how do you manage development and human settlement on the land to respect those different values, the social, economic, environment, all those components to how we live, how we order the land use. The other point there is, it has that same consistency rule with the OCPs that all bylaws and services undertaken must be consistent. And it also has a similar component. If you are actually wanting to guide settlement, zoning is what you need to do it. Without it, we can't really control that. It's at the whim of whoever owns the land. The fourth point to make here, and I think that gets to your question, Director Vandenberg, is the who. Regional, these regional growth strategies involve multiple borders or local governments, or they can involve improvement districts as well. So you've got the authority in both cases comes from the local government act. And this is a particular one that we don't use, like I said, in the regional district of Central Kootenai, but others have, because they found it helpful to align those strategies of land use planning across multiple jurisdictions. So I hope that helps. And again, if it doesn't, perhaps we can get into more detail. And again, the next bit I'm going to get into is the background we've provided. So if there's more kind of on the high level notion of the plans we use and how we do land use planning, I could certainly field that question from Director Davidoff. Now's a good time.
Well, we'll go back for further from Director Vandenberg, and then yes, I'd like to go to Director Davidoff if there's overlap. Go ahead, Director Vandenberg.
Thank you, Chair. And so Nelson, to your point that you just made, that clarification, the regional growth strategy entered my mind saying that this could be that missing link or inconsistency within RDCK of not having OCPs. Okay, we have some here, we have some there, but if we had a regional growth strategy, would that help? Would that be that overall arching umbrella that would help bring some of these other missing things in?
Yeah, I think Chair Jackman, I think to his question, yes, it could. And this is an element of the workshop we intend to get into in a bit more detail. Okay. And so I hope in the intervening days, we'll provide some more resources to understand a bit more about other jurisdictions that have taken that approach and why they did that and what the provincial government says in terms of our authority in using that tool.
Or what's mandated in terms of establishing and reviewing OCPs versus whether it's mandated a regional growth strategy. Good questions. I just didn't want to go too far down without municipal directors participating. So Director Davidoff, I did want to go to you, and then Director Cunningham.
Yes, Chair. If Nelson can go back to the previous slide as well. Thank you. Okay. So I got a few things to say that are probably, well, I'll just say them. What I see here is a flow chart, and we used a different flow chart in the mid-90s. Because what we did when we did our official community plans, we did the zoning at the same time to make sure. So if we wanted to rezone whole areas, we did that as a combined process. Now, Louis has shared with us that we can still do that. We don't have to follow this, because what's happening is that you can have an official community plan, but what we're seeing more and more is that, well, maybe we should have one bylaw that applies to everybody. And then we don't get any bylaw work done until we get something that applies to everyone. We need a regional strategy. We need something that applies to all electoral areas. And that's not the way we worked before. There are some things that maybe we can work on together. But when we do an OCP and don't do bylaw concurrently, then individuals have to apply to rezone their properties within the policy guidelines that we set in an official community plan. The other thing is development permits areas. Louis let us know that we could have development permit rules that have teeth, like being able to control hours of operation. We're dealing with that right now as a real life example where our development permit guidelines don't allow hours of operation. Form and character of landscaping and stuff like that, they have no teeth. So I think, and a third thing is autonomy. And that is whether each electoral area has the autonomy to work with its residents to basically have, even within that area, we have nuances with, I think Amy says, she always says she's got over 20 communities, and they all have different needs and wants. But the bottom line is that we are moving in a flow chart that is taking us to a regional plan for everything, pretty much, and moving away from autonomy of electoral areas. And I'm seeing more and more of that down the road, and holding off on doing any zoning during an OCP process because we're waiting for, well, let's do an omnibus bylaw and zoning that applies to everybody consistently. So am I wrong in my perception? And do we need to have teeth in the rules that we set? The noise bylaw is under attack right now. You should see what's happening with the noise bylaw.
So to Nelson, then, I don't think we're moving in any direction. You're just showing us the field.
Yeah.
We can wander around, or what was the word? Muddle around on. Nelson.
Well, Chair, with due respect, I know we're moving in a different direction. It's not, it's real because we're in the middle of that nary eye right now.
Sorry, Director, I meant in this committee at this point, we're just examining the breadth and depth of the field of opportunity. No decisions or movement out of this here. The society writ large, we don't have the weeks to have that discussion. Nelson.
So first of all, to Director David asked question, are you wrong? Not necessarily, but I would quibble on a number of points you've made. Key being this notion of moving to a regional model. That's up to you. And I think that the tension to explore between regional versus local is one that you, Director David, have spoken to a lot in my conversations with him previously. And this is really interesting work that we anticipate getting into next week. And so I really encourage you to bring those views for that discussion. That's really important to wrestle with, because that's at the heart of some of the work we need to do. The other point on the zoning at OCP and the no teeth in DPs, again, I quibble with you on those. We've talked about it in the past, and I would really like, in the interest of time, to follow up with you on that in greater detail before next week, because that would be really helpful for both of us, if you're willing to do that, Director David.
Okay, it's just my perception. Chair, supplemental.
Yes, go ahead, please.
Yeah, I'm just sharing my perception, having gone through being very intimately involved with what the process in 1995, and here we are a heck of a lot of years later, working on our OCP process in Area I, and that's kind of what I shared. Those questions are my perception of what's happening and what we're coming under attack for right now in real life. I'm not making this up. Stuart's aware of what I'm talking about. So the key thing is that I'll save my stuff till next till the planning session, and that's fine for now. But I'm just I got a pretty good feel for where things are going, and I understand the logic behind a lot of it. But the key thing is that it's definitely moving in a different direction. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Director. We have sort of on this fairly broad chart here, we still have Director Cunningham and Watson. Please, Director.
Thank you, Chair. Recently, I mean, last 6 years or so, revised our official community plan and made it apply to all of Area G. And when I first became a director, we had no community plans, we had no zoning, we had no land use bylaws of any type. And we did the first one. And after post-revised number 5, after 10 or 12 years, we did the second revision. But in any case, the point being, of course, is that we moved some of the various parts of Area G still only have an official community plan. Most of Area G now has zones, and with the we're talking to each individual neighborhood and the small community to say, what do you want? What do you want to protect? What do you want to be able to have? And the people at this point are, when we had the final community meeting, there was, I think, one or two objections that they had to do with things like private land logging rather than the actual individual zoning areas and the things done in each individual zone. Those people were happy knowing that in Weimar, you can actually put two houses on one lot and use one as a rental or B&B or whatever, and that's some other areas as well. People like that. Other areas that listen, we want 20-acre minimums because we're farmland and when they saw the protection that they had by having those kinds of things, so they were able to maintain their lifestyle without having other people, you know, the Creston example, for example, where the guy built a house close to I believe it was a farm, and they got into a nice disagreement with the farmer under the Farm Act, piled most of his pig manure next to his property line, and this was quite some time ago. Yeah, we don't have those kinds of things. We do have some strange things. I mean, like, we didn't used to have a fence height bylaw. That one lady who decided she would like the suntan nude built a 25-foot plywood fence in front of the neighbor who had picked it. So, when that came up for election, that was changed. And unfortunately for her, whatever the case may be, yeah, we have a fence height of, believe it or not, 8 feet, because we get 6 feet of snow sometimes in the winter. And you need 8 feet just to stop the dogs from crossing over onto your property. And that was the community's decision. By doing those kinds of things and making it personal, people are happy. And they're right now, the only thing I get is people that are upset with the new thing that said, hey, are they telling me I can't have a short-term rental on my property? I've been doing this for years and I've got all my regular vacationers who come every year. Is that what's going to happen? Those kinds of things, I think, become difficult because people are used who have gone the route and have gone through the official plan right down to the zoning bylaws. They want that protection, and the fact that they think this protection is being taken from them by the province. That's the biggest thing I've been answering in the last several months.
And that's why through the 3 segments Nelson's planned here, we're gonna little bit of what he is. It sounds like he's just gonna touch on what might be, and most of that'll be February 21st.
Like, no, I understand.
And just sort of a bit of a time check. We started this segment about 10:25, went to about 10:50 with the first part with Stephanie. And we have this meeting booked till noon. We have public time as well. And just thinking of time management, I have on sort of this chart or topic, I have Chair Watson and then maybe we'll to whatever else you have to give us as an overview. Please go ahead.
Thank you. I just wanted to procedurally note a caution for our workshop next week to my fellow directors and to staff that you cannot give direction at a workshop next week. So we can be seeking information, we can be discussing it, but there will be no direction coming out of that workshop that will change the current direction we're in. That would require backup track. So I just wanted to clarify, we're not making decisions at the workshop next week to change the way we're doing things.
Or particularly today, this is more information.
Exactly, sorry.
Correct. Yeah, Nelson, if you want to carry on.
Yeah, fine. We've uploaded a bunch of material for you to have a look at and divided it into some different categories that will hopefully help prepare you, not just for the workshop, but there's material that you may wish to store away for the duration of your term, or as long as you're serving as a director with the regional district. It will be helpful to you in understanding land use planning. A lot of stuff we've created before, and I'm just making it kind of highlighting where we keep it, and so we've covered off in the I'm going to say customer planning. It should say community. Obviously, I didn't do any good reading here. Community planning toolkit is the correct title of this portion, and in that you will find all the information related to OCPs and zoning bylaws, development permits, etc. The various bylaws we use to regulate those components of land use planning. We have some videos that cover off some fundamentals like Planning 101. That's a 15-minute one. We've got one specific to development permits that's only 6 minutes long. And then we've got some presentations that previous directors, maybe the new directors haven't seen, but previous directors maybe would have seen these presentations, and those are all available.
We have, I mentioned some examples we're looking across, at others across the province, and the one is the Cowichan Valley Regional District. And why we've highlighted some of the work they're doing is because it's interesting in the challenges they face are similar to ours when it comes to having multiple OCPs, and how does that challenge us in keeping them up to date and doing the work we need to do. They have 9 of them, I believe, and to our 11. I think somebody told me we're the second highest in the province at 11 OCPs or 11 electoral areas, and we've chosen to do 1 for each. And so they've undertaken a project to harmonize their OCPs and modernize them. And so there's some pages, some web pages that give direction on that, and some videos that are fairly quick. You see there's about 10 minutes worth, and then some to have a look at. The last category of background material I'm going to highlight is the presentation we got from Libby Carvello on, it was on orientation on planning and development law. So you've got close to 3 hours of video to rewatch if you wish, and 200 plus pages of reference material. And note that this is really useful. I've got this in a spot where I can access it readily, and I'm sure you probably already do too, because this is really helpful and can be helpful for you throughout your term. So how about, what do you do for next week?
Can we just go to Chair Watson for one question? Also a caution, of course. General public on this conversation, we have legal advice all the time, and none of the public will be able to see what that is, and it's just normal for us to acknowledge that we have legal advice on various issues. Generally, we don't need any details whatsoever. Chair Watson.
Thank you. Through the chair to Nelson, when I had requested, and I'm wondering if you're able to find, when you shared the Cowichan Valley resource with me, one of my requests was to find that was more geographically similar, because our distance between areas is a large part of where OCP falls apart for me. And I know that's not what we've directed you to do at this time, but I'm just curious about those comparisons. Did we find another regional district that has a similar land mass in terms of, like, you know, Ottawa area D is 4.5 hours from here. So I'm curious if you were able to find similar comparisons. That Cowichan Valley does have quite a bit more cluster development. So the comparison for me is a bit, but I get they have the same amount of OCPs, or at least a similar amount, but geographically they're very different.
Yeah, for the purposes of our learning from them, I would think they're quite a useful example for us. And there are a couple other regional districts across the province who are pursuing this as well. And so again, might be a conversation I'd like to continue with you one-on-one that might be more useful to help me better understand, because I think we might also have different opinions on whether it's the same or not the same. As I look at it as a planner, it's experiencing exactly the same things, or very similar to the challenges that we face in trying to do land use planning on a landscape of that nature. So I see a lot of similarities. But again, without specifics, it might be useful if I can follow up with you directly on that question.
And supplemental.
Supplemental is just that we have had that conversation, and we're going to look for other resources, because even though you may disagree with my perspective, I definitely know from previous planning conversations in Area D and the initial OCP creation, there are distinct differences between Duncan Island and somewhere 5 hours away from there that's still in the same regional district. And so you did not find other resources, or they're not available. Is there no comparison regardless of our different opinions?
Yeah, Chair Jackman, to the question, I do. They're just not top of mind.
Okay.
Sunshine Coast comes to mind. Central Okanagan is another one that comes to mind, but it's not top of mind. So that's why it might be better if I can follow up with you afterwards.
I'm simply requesting that those be shared with us as well. Those examples.
Again, I might have to follow up with you specifically just in what form you'd like those examples. Because in the case of Sunshine Coast Regional District, they're just embarking upon it. So they've just recently put out an RFP. So they haven't got to the stage that CBRD has. CBRD is the only one that I'm aware in the province that's actually got to that stage of actually combining their OCPs. And but we do have other examples that I think I mentioned to you as well. Folks that have used the regional growth strategy model as well, which would be the Mohawks Valley Regional District, and how they approach that notion of regional thinking.
We might touch on it a little bit on February 21st, a little further, but I guess, yeah, you don't have the answers right now.
Well, I think the other point to make there too, Chair, as we prepared for this workshop for you all, we actually invited CVRD to present. So we've invited their staff person and director to share their experience. And maybe from that, you may say, yeah, this looks like something that's useful, or no, it isn't, you know? But the point is, we've given space in that room to do that because we thought, as planners, it seems like it'd be a useful example to look to.
Yeah, we have a time slot in the morning to have a guest presentation on another approach. And that doesn't mean that's the end of the story. It doesn't mean we don't reset and do something else in another meeting, because this is the topic as a follow-up meeting. Just to note, 11 electoral areas. I think we have 2 OCPs, and one of them, we almost had, don't you have north and south at H? Well, it's one OCP. Okay, we almost combined A, B, and C. We do have a local example where we went down the path, the comprehensive land use bylaw. And I think all the good reasons from the planning side were absolutely there. And it was a political schism or split that caused us to pull back. And yet we're still, I think, fairly good lockstep with the modifications, the amendments we've done. But I think we had a very good example right here, where it made sense to cluster, even out across 11. But we had really good conversation. We'd better let you get back to theirs. Oh, I will, sorry, I was gonna note, Director Main left the meeting for another meeting, and sorry, David Off, I see. Go to Director David Off.
Just before you guys share, I just wanted, I would agree with you on the A, B, and C comment. Because, and we noticed that when we did that update for the ag regulation, and Danny could speak to the similarities that were observed in that, and we can talk further about that next week.
Opportunity missed. Director David Off, and you see in chat now, please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. And I just want to comment on the sub-regional, like what happened in ABC and kind of the dynamics sometimes that occurs in sub-regions where you have boundary expansion issues. I'm just going to stop there. My question to the CAO is whether or not Louis' report is, I thought that wasn't in camera.
We have components, we have components of in cameras, so we have to be very cautious, Director.
Yeah, so this is why I am asking whether that report, like, does that mean the workshop's going to be in camera if we're going to deal with this, or how's this going to work? Because this is circulated already to all directors. Now, was there a caution that not be circulated to municipalities, or you get where I'm going with this?
Chair, I could speak to that. When I provided that, remember, this was part of an orientation session that was held. And we got clear direction from Louis as to how far that is to be shared. And I can follow up with you on the specifics as well, but it was for the purpose of the rural directors, I believe. And it might have been more broadly.
Yeah, well, my question is to the CAO.
Yes, he has a comment. So through the chair, the document that Nelson's referenced a few slides ago is a general planning document. It's not specific to any issue that the RDCK was seeking legal advice on.
Okay, so I just wanted that clarified. Thank you very much.
Excellent. Okay, Nelson, please go ahead.
So how can you prepare? I've thought to put it on a continuum. I only have 30 minutes versus I can bend space and time. If you only have 30 minutes, I'd recommend watching the planning videos that we've prepared previously, as many CVRD videos as you can, and call us up. And we can have one-on-one if you have any questions that we can field between now and then that'll help you. If you've got lots of time, do everything that's on, have a look at everything on eScribe, have a look at Louis as a refresher and rewatch it. But I think perhaps most of you will be more in the middle, which is to review anything on eScribe that we put up there that's unfamiliar for you, or for which you might need a refresher. I know we heard that when we did the interview with the directors. You know, there's a lot of information you're dealing with, and sometimes, especially for the new directors, hearing it multiple times is helpful. So
pick from that list that whatever's gonna be useful for you. And remember to save the resources from Louis somewhere to reference throughout your term as a director. And don't hesitate to call us if you have any questions.
We're good. Carry on. Oh, sorry, Director Weatherhead. I hear, I'm looking here and here. You
I'm
move.
blind, I have to. This, what you just showed us, here's this. And I like what you just showed us, this presentation, can I?
Continue.
is this-
Oh, the presentation?
Yeah,
Yeah, sure, we can put that on the screen.
thank you. Trying to write notes, not getting.
Yeah. The last piece I was gonna deal with is the work plan. It's not information that you haven't seen before. This is all stuff you've seen before. And we can go in, as much or as little detail as you'd like. And don't forget, we have about 10 slides for yours, Devin. On housing stuff. Got a bunch of housing stuff to share with you as well. So Chair Jackman, just tell me how much is useful or not for this group, but we broke it out.
I don't think I can do that.
Okay.
I have to open it up to questions. Yeah, go for it.
For starters, there's just 2 slides here that show the projects. And so there's the ones in progress and then the ones not started. I would ignore the status complete column altogether because it's not a super effective tool. But to note the ones in progress, we've got, of course, the area IOCP review, ag policy review, subdivision servicing bylaw, Cascada Nelson active transportation, feasibility study, and the Greater Nelson housing study. And the next group are ones that are at the implementation stage or could be implemented because they're at the ready. The next group are the ones we haven't started. And so Chair Jackman, I've got slides for each one of these that we can get into, and we can go one by one through the list and describe the project and also where we're at.
Yeah, like campground bylaw, we could, yeah, I'm almost afraid to go down that path, but I guess we're gonna have these slides to look at.
Correct, yeah.
And maybe like just campground, just we've all had calls and go, oh, somebody's setting up a campground out of the blue. We'll never get through the conversation. So those would be maybe good points for people to phone you after they look through that list. That makes sense. Are there any burning questions now? Nelson forwarded through that slide fast enough. You couldn't even read what was up.
Oh, well, that's because I got slides for each one of them, but yeah, we can go back. Here they are in the table view. If we can go back to, those are the ones in progress. And then, the next slide has the ones that are, they're not yet started.
Sangeeta has some wisdom here because we could have a 20-minute on each of 20 items. Go ahead.
Yeah, just on the campground bylaw, the reason why it came up years and years ago in our recollection
Yes.
is through zoning, we can control how campgrounds are designed. And really primarily it's for safe egress and for fire services and emergency vehicles. In unzoned areas, we can't. So that was why it was the thought that was put forward and hasn't been done.
And that's the problem, trying to go through all of these. So I don't know if we leave it on the list, does it make sense to the committee? Because Dana has some good information about kind of the housing framework. It'd be nice to take a good part of what time we have scheduled for that.
I think that might be good.
Yeah.
The other thing we could do, if any of you want to stick around, work back. And so we could also do that later. But yeah, we could jump into the housing stuff and then come back to this.
Just so people, if you've had a chance to read it, there were a lot of items we never got to because of just other stuff that snowballs. And we're on the cusp of another big avalanche coming from the province. So understanding the one avalanche a little bit, the housing might be more valuable than trying to piece through all of those. Just understand there's a lot there. Director Cunningham, anything you needed to?
No, just point out that when the hoop slide happened, the first few vehicles got caught in the little slide, and then the big one beat down and buried everybody.
Yeah.
I have a feeling that's possibly what's happening now.
And an airplane hit it. Covered in the highway there years later. So yeah, Director Weatherhead, that's how to find this.
Yeah.
We'll have this set of slides shortly, won't we? And then you can phone about any individual project or that's maybe on hold or maybe in progress, Director Vandenberg?
Are you going to be able to address, OCPs outstanding in the sense that areas C and B, their OCPs are sitting at 13 going on 14 years old? It's a refresh conversation, which I believe is legislated. Not real sure, just guessing there. But what is the likelihood that we'll even start having that conversation that had added to your work plan? I mean, I hate to ask that, but you know, we're getting on. Just making sure that the OCPs in our areas are current for what's required out there.
Yeah. Chair, to the question, one of the images we provided, it was a graphic showing those OCPs in the 11 electoral areas and the dates to them. That's, I believe, on this meeting agenda, you'll see that as a graphic. So it does illustrate that when each of them had been adopted. And to your point, yeah, it's a challenge. And I think that's a challenge that we have to wrestle with as an organization. How do we do that work with the capacity that we have? Well, and that's why I raised the point and why we're doing the workshop. Is there a way we can do it differently? Is there a way we can be more efficient in approaching land use planning in the regional district? And again, looking at examples across the province, understanding what the legislation allows us to do, or do we continue as we have been, and then what are the implications of that approach? These are all topics I think that we can get to in greater detail in our discussion next week and in the months ahead.
Okay, good. Sure, what's
Thanks.
I just want to note that by using the dates on our OCPs, it's misleading. The 2016 update to the Area D OCP was specifically for Ainsworth only. The last time the whole region was reviewed for planning was 2009. And so we are well past the time for an update. Which is why I made a motion 3 years ago.
Yep. So, we're going to, I didn't see anyone else, but I can chat here. Are we gonna go to the housing part then? Is this a good time to go to that? So this is a little bit about what might be or will be. Yeah, we're not gonna solve it, but give us some advance information to think about.
Okay, so thanks for this opportunity. I'll take the last bit of our meeting here to go over the new provincial legislation and how it affects changes to housing regulations in the RDCK. So to start, we'll go over a summary of the bills that were passed this fall and just a high-level overview of how the province got there. And then we'll break it into little pieces of the things that affect us. So small-scale multi-unit housing, proactive planning, development finance, tools, and short-term rentals. And then lastly, in summary, we can look back at where are the musts versus the mays, what's our timeline looking at, and some funding that the province is providing. So as an introduction, 2023, big year for the province passing housing legislation. Their Homes for People, which is the province's housing action plan, came out in the spring of this year. And then in the fall, we saw a slew of bills being passed. And so there's Bill 44, the Residential Development Amendment Act. That's really the meat and potatoes of what affects us. And so that's what I'll talk about in the most detail. Bill 46, the Development Financing Amendment Act. Bill 47, the Transit Orientated Areas Amendment Act. That doesn't affect anywhere near our area or our region, so I don't touch on that in this presentation, but if you have a question about it, we can ask some high-level answers. And then lastly, the Short-Term Rental Accommodation Act. So I'm going to dive into Bill 44. Starting with small-scale multi-unit housing, which has the unfortunate acronym of SMUH. But you may also hear people say missed and middle housing, and that's another way to refer to this. The province is defining it as housing options that are ground-orientated and compatible in scale and form within established single-family neighborhoods. So that's where you get that missing middle piece. What's the piece between single detached housing and apartments? And that's where you get this small. And so the bill has 3 layers. You'll see the arrow at the top. That's where we end. But the first layer is secondary suites and accessory dwelling units. So this applies province-wide in all single-family residential zones, in all municipalities and regional district areas. My next couple slides will dive into more detail. The next layer is 3 to 4 units in single-family zones. That applies within urban containment boundaries if you have a regional growth strategy, and municipalities over 5,000 people. And the last layer is 6 units near frequent bus service. And so that applies near frequent bus services on single family and duplex residential lots that are greater than 280 meters squared within a municipality or regional district with a maximum population of 5,000. And we, I'm sure you're well aware, we don't have any frequent bus service, so that is also not applicable to us. So let's focus on that first layer.
Can we take a clarification question? I have maybe 2 of them on this, Bennett, Urban, Weatherhead on that chart. And must or may apply might be the biggest question. Director Bennett.
Thank you. The 3 to 4 unit is saying in single family zones, regional growth strategy in municipalities over 5,000 people, like that is an incorporated municipality, correct?
That would be, City of Nelson, City of Castlegar, in our region, those would be falling under that requirement.
What about unincorporated with larger populations? Are they not considered that?
No, so unincorporated or areas in the regional district, you would go up a layer and they're just looking at applying that secondary dwelling, whether it be attached as a secondary or detached.
Okay, because it's probably service related.
Yeah, and then just to make it even less clear, the last level, 6 units, that applies whether you're in a muni or regional district if there's a frequent bus service. And so you can disregard that because it's not applicable in our region. There's no bus coming every 15 minutes.
15 minutes metric, because otherwise area H would almost have met that before the rural backup population. Director Weatherhead, then what's?
Oh, no, sorry, it was actually, I didn't really have a question, because you accidentally said maximum population of 5,000.
Oh, I'm sorry.
But I get it, thank you.
Thank you. Just on where the arrow is to the secondary suites and accessory dwelling units. When I read the act and the primers, it indicated that those areas that do not have local government water services or wastewater would be exempted from that. So that does remove a large part of it, does it not?
Even if you don't have servicing, the first layer required, but it applies.
If you have zoning,
No, everywhere.
how do you break?
Okay.
You don't.
I lost that.
Yeah, maybe just
Can I go
push
to
it again
the next slide? Might answer some.
in detail. Please go ahead. Yep.
So I have a couple slides that just kind of break down further that requirement around secondary suites and accessory dwelling units. What they are, on the screen, you'll see the province's definition, but in a nutshell, an accessory dwelling unit is, you hear them called garden suites, carriage houses, laneway houses. They're secondary to the primary dwelling, but they are detached and they're their own building, versus a secondary suite is its own dwelling unit, but it's within the home. And where this requirement is applicable is anywhere defined as a restricted zone by the province, and that's a zone in respect of which the permitted use would be restricted to detached single-family dwellings. And I think where some of the confusion is if you were required to have the 3 or 4 dwelling units, and that wouldn't apply to the unserviced area. So when I used to work for the city of Prince George, even though it's all in municipalities, some areas up by the airport didn't have servicing. And so although Prince George is a municipality over 5,000 people, that area without servicing wouldn't require the 3 to 4 units, but the secondary suites and accessory dwelling units don't have that exemption. And so how this can look, local governments may choose to do any of the following. You can permit only 1 secondary suite, you can permit only one accessory dwelling unit. You can allow landowners to choose either a secondary suite or an accessory dwelling unit, so you're keeping the maximum density to 2 dwelling units, the house in some form of a suite. Or you can permit the construction of both, a secondary suite and an ADU. And so that would be 3 dwelling units on a property. And also this might provide further clarification. In setting their requirements, local governments still need to ensure the requirements of other provincial legislation and regulations are met. So that would include the Drinking Water Protection Act and the Sewerage System Regulation. So in that vein, they're recommending that only secondary suites, non-accessory dwelling units should be permitted on properties less than 1 hectare in size that are not serviced by sewer systems operated by a local government.
So I have a burning question here, and Director Weatherhead as well, I see. So the problem is, Ontario Health Authority, the province, started off with over and under 500 population on a water system. Then they said that was small, under 500 users per day. And then they came up with a concept, partly due to Andy Shadrack and other noisy people, some of whom were in this room, came up with a concept of micro and nano. And they quit looking at nano water systems, is my experience. There's Shreveport people sharing a water box to separate dwellings. They just pretend that it doesn't exist. They're not hassling. That's the only way we're going to see the second and third occupancy of a separate household, is it could be sharing a point of diversion. Otherwise, it'll cost a fortune, point of entry. Has the province been clear on that at all? Are they going to want to see entire compliance with 43210 for every residence for us to do this?
In my personal opinion, I think that these regulations really cater to service areas, and we are going to stumble as we try to fit that into unserviced areas. And an example of that is when I was in the provincial webinar training, I asked about what about lots that exist, especially in Area F, where they're well under 1 hectare and they can't accommodate a secondary suite with the servicing. You can't fit a septic field for the additional fixtures. You know, is there an exemption for that? And I'm kind of proud to stump them. And I've been waiting about 3 weeks for an answer. So honestly, I don't think that's been super thought out, and I think we're gonna have to muddle through that a little bit.
That word comes back. Sangeeta had some on that, and then Director Weatherhead. Sangeeta.
Yeah, I can just speak to my own personal experience. I built during COVID, like most people, a secondary accessory building on my property, and I'm using it for an office. And since it doesn't have a kitchen in it, but when we connected the septic, we had to get IHA to approve that connection. It was, as well as the water, like we have an indeterminate source of water, which is Cookie Lake. And so that allowed it. So there was going to be some muddling, but there's also some opportunity. Like that's not a rental unit, but it could become one in the future because it has all the servicing that it needs. That size.
So this is where a $40,000 forgivable loan incentive to do this will be consumed, and more than that, just doing the servicing. Director Weatherhead.
I may not have this all clear yet. Thank you through the chair to Dan. So in a community, just use Colter as an example, BC Hydro owns the sewage system, and they will not allow any infrastructure, anybody else to be hooked up to that sewage system, so therefore that.
I think in the hierarchy, they still have that authority. We can't zone to match that, but they can still have the authority to not provide more connection.
Okay, so if there's an.
Is how I understand.
Okay.
They don't have that. Just as an aside, I saw UBCM is doing a housing convention right now, and I got an email this morning, and they did a breakout about with large group municipalities and small municipalities about this topic. And both of them said the hardest thing about it is going to be infrastructure and then capacity, staff capacity. And it didn't matter if you were City of Vancouver or McBride. It seemed like everyone is having that kind of comment about this. This is my last slide on the small scale, so if there's any other questions, the next slide changes topic.
Okay, well, go supplemental in that slide. Then I'd like to insert public time because we have quite a few people on and then we'll go back. So go ahead.
Okay, so just quickly supplemental, then if the authority is us, like on a regional district water system, which is on boil water advisory, then we are the authority on that. So then, how does it work then?
We would say we cannot add new connections to
Cannot
thermal
add.
boil water. If it's a permanent boil water, not allowed.
So it makes no change to.
I think in the zoning would say, yes, you have that ability, and the reality would be, no, because there's no service.
Okay, so thank you.
And I should ask CEO to answer that. Because we have that in Senka. Yeah, let's do your slide and then get any other questions on small, then we'll go quickly to public time. I suspect some of the public are on the line because of this topic. And then we'll go back to you and see how far we go. Thanks.
My next slide is on a different topic, so it's like a spot.
Oh, this is the last slide. Okay, well then, I will open it up then to the public. We're at seconds away from 11:45, which is one of our traditional times. So I don't know who's on now, I got back participants. I did see Valley Voice, and there's several other members of the public. So opening it up to anyone from the press, Rachel, or anyone from the public, do you have a question for this committee? If you have, just unmute.
Valley Voice, thanks.
Oh, sorry, there was nothing today from Valley Voice?
No, nothing for me, thanks.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else from the public with a question for the committee? See hands raised, don't see anything else, so I guess we're good. So yeah, Dana, please go ahead to the next topic.
Thank you, Chair. So the next bite we're gonna take out of Bill 44 is proactive planning. That's the province's requirements around housing needs reports, official community plans, zoning bylaws, and public hearings. So again, housing needs reports, there's a couple of tiers that the arrow indicates where we stop at the regional district. So there's a new requirement to update housing needs reports using a standard method on a regular basis for a more consistent, robust understanding of local housing needs now projected over 20 years. If you are a municipality, you then have to go the next step. Plan for these needs in official community plans on a regular basis. So once you've updated your housing needs report, you're required to incorporate that into your OCP and then align your zoning bylaw with the OCP and the housing needs report to pre-zone for the total amount of housing their communities need on a regular basis. So the province is trying to connect these processes. But again, recognizing that regional districts are a different beast and we have multiple zoning bylaws and OCPs, it's a best practice for us and not a requirement like it would be if you were a municipality. So again, we stop at the first tier. We are still required to update our housing needs report by the end of this year to the province's new standard. What that new standard is, they haven't released the details on, but we do know that it will be a further projection than past housing reports that will have to go for 20 years out.
Director Vandenberg, the question on this one?
Yeah, so the standard must also provide a formula. My knee jerk on this is how can you possibly imagine what things are going to be in 20 years? And how would you project to that? Because it's got, whatever you're projecting to, you have to provide for. And I'm just wondering the fairness in that. Like, how is that possible? Can you do that? Project 20 years and like, I guess every year you're projecting 20 years. I suppose that's how you keep up.
Every 5 years now you keep refreshing.
Refreshing,
So
okay,
yeah,
so
we
through
go-
refreshing, you're,
So in 2024, we're looking till 2044, and then in 2029, we're looking till 2049.
right, okay. No, so every 5 years it just gets reset.
You're always looking at that 20 year.
Well, then what's the point of going 20 years? Every 5 years.
Because it takes a long time to meet needs and demographic shifts alone, we can project 10, 20 years. Who needs different housing? Nelson had a comment.
I just wanted to say, it's not rocket science, but it is science. And there's excellent people that do this work. We hired a company to do our housing needs assessment. I was really impressed with the depth and rigor that they apply. And picking like a different growth scenario and multiple different scenarios and saying, okay, what do we think is the most likely?
given what we've seen historically, and using that to make those predictions on what it's gonna look like. So I encourage you, if you haven't looked at the housing needs assessment that was done a few years ago, there's again, really good information in there, and it goes into the methodology too, which might be helpful.
Chair Watson, then we'll move to the next one. Go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to, similar to the other work, like the DPA work and whatnot, that we move forward on with outdated OCPs. Now, you can't control this because we're required to do the housing needs assessment updates, but we're now going to be updating OCPs with new housing needs assessments while the OCP remains 20 years out of date.
It's our choice when, because we're not a municipality, it's our choice when we get to updating the OCP, whether it would be project specific to the housing needs or when we do the OCP the next time, we'll put in the new housing needs assessment. It's only municipalities that have a timeline of 2025 to get their housing needs reports into their OCP.
Supplemental?
Sure. Yeah.
I mean, I'm not opposed to the fact that housing needs assessments are a good way to deal with, the housing issues, noting that real estate is really the biggest problem and no one's controlling that. That's definitely what's causing impacts in Area D. Short-term rentals are all going to Area D because there's no regulations for them. But if we have discretion, I just will keep emphasizing 4 or 5 years now that the outdated OCP should be the foundational work we're focusing on before we do anything else. That's why I didn't support moving forward with DPAs into OCPs, because the OCPs are outdated and they are our foundational documents. So if we have that discretion, I will not support moving forward on updating housing needs assessment with outdated OCPs.
I'm gonna go to Sangeeta first, because I don't think we have a choice in updating housing needs assessment. Isn't that mandatory? Sangeeta?
Yeah, that's what I was gonna say. And so I know we've talked about this before, Director Watson and I. And we talked earlier about how do we make sure that our OCPs, 11 of them, are always current and updated with the most information. And at this time, in my mind, and based on my experience working here, it is best to do it when we have mandated direction or when there are things becoming obvious. And we've talked about some of the wildfire DPAs, like risks that we need to mitigate for. We could look at that or not. It's a decision of the board. But at the end of the day, I feel that the best approach for right now, for all these OCPs, and through the workshop, we're going to talk about it a bit more, is to do it when we have to do it. And maybe a regional growth strategy is kind of that strategy we need to help us define what that looks like, but not getting into much detail, because that's more of a discussion we can have at the workshop and a decision that staff can get direction from you on.
Supplemental?
Yes, and after Director Cunningham, but also Dan between. Go ahead and.
Two supplemental real quick. Dan had just said it was discretionary when we did our housing needs assessment update. So that's what I was referencing. And the second point is the fact that we have waited to do OCPs and done project-specific work instead has meant that I have serious impacts in areas that would have been prevented if we had moved the OCP into zoning after 2009 and not waited. So there are serious impacts to waiting for OCPs to only when we have mandated issues to implement into them. And I'm a broken record. I've been saying it for years. And that's why I actually had motions on the table and in the work plan to address the long-standing outdated work that needs to be done. And also I never supported the DPAs moving forward into them. So we disagree, and that's fine. But I feel like we're repeating the same conversation so many times, and it seems like it's disregarded the fact that there's physical impacts occurring to the land that I'm getting called on as being counter to our intentions, especially with the climate change fund. We have a whole area that's now industrial that was supposed to be residential active transit connections that no longer is possible because it's now industrial. But that was the original OCP indication 15 years ago.
So if you could clarify, Dana, that we must do the housing update, but we are not required at this time to incorporate that into our OCPs. Is that?
Must update our housing need report by the end of this year. It's our discretion when we implement that into our OCP. And so
Okay, thank you. That's
these are great questions and I'm happy to keep answering them. I just wanted to let the chair know I have about 10 slides.
Okay, we had a question from Director Cunningham and we'll do a time check in 5 minutes or so.
Very quickly, or maybe just a statement. My first OCP was more than 20 plus years ago. And they were at that time, we were supposed to be updated every 5 years, at least that's what staff told us. And it took about 13 or 14 years before we finally even got to start on it. I can understand the previous director's frustration. I certainly think we need to figure out together and get OCPs done wherever we can, as soon as we can, so that we can move into the next step, which is zoning for people who want that kind of protection.
So just thinking, it's as if, I mean, we schedule Tom. We always put on the staff and we'd have other things to do, like give minutes and maybe eat lunch and go into the next thing. So I don't want to presume we're gonna bleed to 12:30 like we did last month. We went to 12:32. So before going into more questions, I would actually like Dana for you to at least show us the content on the next 10 slides. What kind of stuff have you got in your mind that we need to be thinking about before we get to February 21st? Because we're not going to solve any of this today. So I would like to move ahead with those slides, Director Vandenberg. Quickly, you're concerned about this, or do we just move ahead and see what she's got?
I have another meeting with fire at noon.
Yeah, as I say, everybody will have something to do.
Yep.
Life, it's called. And so I'd like, let's run the slides and see what we need to be thinking about before February 21st.
Okay, I will do my best to be succinct. The next slide is the most meaty, and then I think the other ones we can go through a bit quicker. Okay, so the next important point is public hearings. So housing projects that are consistent with an OCP will no longer have a public hearing. That's not at our discretion, that's a requirement. So instead, what will happen is a notice of board meeting where the application will be considered will be issued before first reading. So this is a diversion from in the past where the board could choose to waive a public hearing like we chose this morning if it was aligned with the OCP. Now it is a must if you are dealing with housing. And the province's intent is for more frequent opportunities for people to be involved in shaping their communities earlier in the process at the OCP stage rather than later in the process at the public hearing stage. And I just want to emphasize that other rezonings that do not meet this criteria, so if we're looking at applications that are of commercial, industrial, or mixed use nature where it is less than 50% residential, or if you're looking at application of residential that requires an OCP amendment, you can still continue to have a public hearing. Okay. Development finance tools. So we're done Bill 44. I'll try to speed through Bill 46 because it's a little bit less relevant to us, but I think it's important information to know. So if you've ever heard of development cost charges, these are fees local governments can collect on new development to help pay for specific infrastructure needed to adequately service the demands of that new development. So that could include water, sewer, drainage, roads. Of course, this is more commonly happening in municipalities where those services are provided. But changes to the DCC framework updates the scope of infrastructure eligible to be funded. So now it can include fire protection facilities, example fire hall, police facilities, and solid waste facilities. So getting a little more into services that regional districts offer. So RDCK does not currently collect DCCs, but has the option to explore them if desired. So not a requirement, but something to know. Similarly, another new tools amenity cost charges. You might have heard of community amenity contributions, which were a negotiation tool that usually large municipalities had at the rezoning stage to negotiate around more density. You can have an extra 10 units, but we're going to need a public plaza. That was an example. Now the province has taken away that ability for the negotiation piece, and it has to be more formalized like DCCs are in a bylaw. So amenity cost charges are a new development finance tool that allow local governments to collect funds for amenities, not services like DCCs, but amenities like community centers, recreation centers, daycares, libraries, from new development that results in an increased population. It requires passing an ECC bylaw, It's important to note that ICK did not collect community amenity contributions in the past, so the fact that that practice has ended is no bones off our body. But we do have the option to explore ACCs in the future if we desire to. Lastly, I'm going to touch on short-term rentals. So legislation has been enacted to turn short-term rentals to the long-term rental market. And a big piece of that is a principal residence requirement. So in communities over 10,000, there will be a limit of short-term rentals to the host's principal residence plus one secondary suite or accessory dwelling unit on the same property. We get so many questions about this. This does not apply to RDCK electoral areas, but the RDCK board could choose to opt into this requirement by resolution. It can be refined by electoral area, so some electoral areas could opt in, others could pass. The deadline to opt in is March 31st, but the province intends this to be yearly, so if it doesn't happen March 31st of this year, you're interested in exploring by March 31st of next year, that's fine. And I just added a note that RDCK zone areas do already have existing regulations for short-term rentals that generally limit them to more of a bed and breakfast style, but it depends. Another interesting feature is business licensing has been opened up to regional districts. So regional districts are now able to regulate and license short-term rentals and other businesses similar to the way municipalities do now. So regional districts can implement business licensing by following applicable requirements such as establishing a bylaw. So again, not requirements, but an interesting option to explore. And lastly, the other regulations that come with short-term rentals are increased fines, increased tickets, the requirement to display a business license when you're listing on platforms like Airbnb or Vrbo, requirement for those platforms to data share with the province, changes to legal non-conforming use protections, a provincial registry of these short-term rentals, and a provincial compliance and enforcement unit. So in summary, that's a lot of information. So I've tried to summarize it in two ways. One with the timeline, and two with breaking it down with what do we have to do and what could we do if we wanted to. So the timeline is now, no more public hearings for housing that is advised by the OCP. GCC, development cost charges and amenity cost charges are enabled. Business licensing and increased tickets and fines are enabled. March 31st of this year is the deadline to opt in for short-term rental principal residence requirements. But again, as noted, that date could also be next year, March, the year after March. May 1st is when the short-term rental principal residence comes into play, as well as the legal non-conforming and display license requirements. June 30th is put a star by that one. That's the date that we're required to update all our bylaws for the missing middle housing or SMUP. And January 1st, 2025, let's say, is when our housing needs report needs. Two more slides. Yeah. So again, what do we have to do versus what can we do? When we're looking at secondary suites and ADUs, we have to update our bylaws by June 30th of this year. When we're looking at the housing need assessment, we have to update that assessment by January 1st of this year using the province's new format. But we may update our OCP and zoning bylaws as a best practice. We must adopt new processes for public hearings for residential rezoning that align with the OCP and update our planning and procedures and fees bylaw to reflect that. We may explore what development cost charges and amenity cost charges could look like for the RDCK. And for short-term rentals, we may opt into the primary residence requirement and explore business licensing. If those slides freaked you out, I hope the last two give you a little bit of solace. Here's some funding. The province provided the regional district with about 280 grand, and this can be used to support activities or projects that we have to undertake to meet these new requirements. So that can include updating a housing needs report, a new zoning bylaw, official community plan. It can also be used to hire staff or consultants. And lastly, I'll just throw this in there. A lot of these do align some of the actions of our housing action plan and things we've looked at in the past. It's just with a very accelerated timeline. So a lot of these aren't too far out of left field. For example, we passed a resolution after our housing needs assessment was done as a quick win to look at accessory dwelling units and incentivize infill. And so this is just making us move a bit faster than we probably would. Thanks for your attention. I know that was a lot of information. That's all I have.
That was stellar. So I don't think we're gonna be able to go through questions and not actually run right into joint resource. I did want to give Nelson a bit of a closing here though, because thinking differently or approaching things differently, you gave us that message earlier. I mean, there's a lot of what here. We're not gonna solve it all, but February 21st, I think, Nelson, you're gonna maybe start framing some options of how we can do this work. But anyway, please close this up.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I just appreciate your time today and your investment in preparing for next week. And that you've come with a fresh mind and open to exploring this challenging world of land use planning in the regional district, because it is a challenge. And like I said, we have 11 electoral, that's the second highest in the province. And so it's complicated. Can we do things differently? Or if we don't, what are the implications? We'll explore that to the extent that we can. We're working with a facilitator who's guiding us, and I think we've got a really good program in mind to how we can explore these in a meaningful way, giving voice to everybody present and participating collegially, getting that work done.
Thanks very much to staff for giving us this preview. And I can ask any other questions, except I would ask for a motion to adjourn. Verdict seconded, without objection. We're adjourned. Thanks, everybody, and we'll see most of you at 1 o'clock.
Yeah.
When to